Aliens reprogrammed my brain. An MDMA and 2CT7 trip report by Mitra, posted to earwid.org August 17, 2001. A word of warning. 3 days after this experience, I was told about a number of deaths occurring from the same combination. This has led me to believe that what I did was not safe, and thus I probably will not repeat the experiment. I find this very unfortunate, as I found it to be the single most useful combination for myself to date. 10:30 PM. Took 1 pill of very strong MDMA. 11:15 PM. Start rolling quite hard now. 1 AM. My roll is tapering off and I feel very grumpy that I do not have another pill or any acid to bring me back up. I find that I usually don't get the most interesting part of the roll until I bump. I then remember that I have some 2CT7 in the closet. I had previously done a small quantity of it and had not been very impressed. Some of my friends did some of my 2CT7 in the past, from which they all puked off it, and complained they'd never try it ever again. Temporarily forgetting about the negative parts of my friends' experiences, I went to the closet and retrieved a pre-measured 20 to 25 milligram, not exactly sure, bundle of the stuff. I snort roughly half of it, at 10 milligrams. 1:10 AM. Suddenly rolling very hard again with some visual disturbances. 1:20 AM. Feeling slightly, very slightly actually, nauseated, but I feel like I should probably go to the bathroom. At 1:25 AM I start puking. I'm very matter-of-fact about it. It isn't pleasant, but it doesn't really bother me. I don't really feel that bad. My body just wants to cleanse itself. 1:35 AM. I finally stopped dry heaving. I wiped tears from my eyes, breathed deeply, and relaxed after that trying experience. I realise that I'm feeling entirely better. I also realise that I'm rolling very hard, and that there is starting to be some very bright colours coming out of everything. I manage to brush my teeth and then I head outside for a smoke. I have a very hard time navigating to the front porch, because the visuals are suddenly so plentiful that I can't see where I'm stepping. 2 AM. I now realise that I still haven't lit the cigarette in my hand. I've been watching the trees in front of me in amazement. With each heartbeat, which I can feel throughout my whole body, a second image of everything in front of me breaks off and goes spiralling off into infinity, changing colours as it goes. My entire field of vision is a kaleidoscope of bright neon-coloured, overlapping copies of the original scene, zooming in fractal spirals. Slight movements of my head send the spirals moving off in new directions. I light my cigarette and realise I'm having physical hallucinations too. I move my arm to flick the ash off the cigarette, and I feel 100 extra arms spiral off towards infinity, just like my visuals are doing. I put out the cigarette and start moving about playing with this. I am the insect yogi. I contort my body into the most amazing yogic postures as I dance about. I realise that I do not have even the slightest beginnings of an understanding as to the nature of the game that this combination provides, and I wish that I had friends along with me to figure out these games with. At 7 AM, I have just realised it is 7 AM. I've been playing with this bizarre new form of trip for 5 hours and I didn't notice the time pass. For that matter, I don't seem to have come down very much at all. The visuals have subsided a good deal, I decide. They are only 10 times more abundant than on anything I've ever felt before. I wonder if I'm going to come down anytime soon and start to get slightly stressed because it is now daytime. 7:10 AM. Now I am really stressed out, and have become convinced that I should go to bed and try to sleep. I attempt to do this, which obviously does not work in the slightest. However, this is when the interesting part begins. I'm getting some neat, very brightly coloured closed-eye visuals, and then something organises them into some alien combination lock. I realise that it is the password protection mechanism to my mind, and something is trying to hack the code. Said something is very good at this, and the pieces start falling into place. As each piece falls into place, I feel something shift and open in my mind, and a corresponding physical shift and opening in my body. When something finishes dialing in the correct combination, everything unlocks and opens up like some sort of puzzle box, and it thrusts me into hyperspace. By hyperspace, I mean what I have read in descriptions of the most extreme DMT excursions. I am in another place entirely, and this place is incredibly intricate. There are thousands of entities flying around. Nearby, a group of 10 or so of the entities have tied me down, and they begin to perform surgery on my mind, or maybe they are hacking it. Either way, it feels really invasive and disturbing to have them in there, and I start to become quite frightened. I reach back to another place that I remember used to exist. I run a command there called Open the Eyes. This works, and I snap back into my body and open my physical eyes. Everything seems reasonably normal, except that I am high and failing to sleep. I then realise that this is only a part of me here in the room, and that another part of me is still back where I left it, and I am not there to witness what they are doing to it. I close my eyes again, and instantly my body falls apart and disappears. I am now back in hyperspace with the entities still working on my mind. 9:30 AM. I've moved to the couch now. With my eyes open, things are mostly normal, but frightening still, and I don't really want to look at anything. With my eyes closed, I'm still in hyperspace interacting with the entities. They are being more interactive now. The beings are still working on my mind, but now they want to play games as well. Maybe to see how things are going. Now I begin to find out what this has all been about, really. All of my carefully constructed mental shields start to dissipate. I realise for the first time that I've been in a deep state of denial about a great many things. I begin to see clearly all the ways in which I behave in self-destructive or self-decepting ways. I see clearly all the ways that I am self-absorbed and selfish. I see all the ways that I am cruel or insensitive to my wife and friends. I see that I've been engaging in a number of addictive type behaviours. If this had been acid, I would be sobbing and feeling like killing myself. But in this state, I am able to look at it all honestly and from an objective standpoint, without getting too upset about it. It's more like I feel a sense of obligation to deal with it. Instead of getting down on myself for it, I begin to have a sense of pride in myself. I realise that I have too much pride and self-respect to continue behaving like this. I feel that it is a matter of pride and principle that I fix these behaviours immediately, and even go as far as to make reparations for the damage that I've done. I set out an honest and realistic plan on how to go about fixing my relationship with my wife. I promised to quit smoking, start exercising regularly, stop abusing drugs and only use them appropriately. At the time, I was doing MDMA every weekend, and doing up to 6 pills in a night, often in combination with a lot of alcohol, Mary Jane, acid, nitrous and anything else I could get my hands on. I began planning how I was going to start taking responsibility for a whole lot of things that I'd been shirking. By the time the entities were done with me, I had a very long list of things that I had to fix or make up for. 11 AM. The entities have finally left. They closed up my mind and hyperspace went away. I feel shaken by the whole experience. I still have the feelings of pride in myself. The world looks mostly normal again, but colours are still brighter. There's still no way in hell I am sleeping, but I'm okay with that for now. After all, I have a lot of work ahead of me. 11:30 AM. My wife wakes up and wants to go do things. I decide that I'm ready to interact with the outside world, and we both leave. 11:30 PM. I finally go to sleep. It's been 3 months since then, and I've straightened up my act. I have succeeded in most of my goals from that night. My relationship is much better, I've quit smoking, and I'm involved in an exercise program, Hapkido and yoga, which I love. My drug use has been lowered down to a reasonable level in my mind, if not even what one might call an ascetic level. In the last 3 months I've gone through 2 MDMA pills and 2 hits of LSD, and I've smoked pot a couple of times and only been drunk 5 or 6 times. I'm doing well at work and have a sense of responsibility. I also have what one might refer to a decent level of self-respect and pride in doing what I do right. I think it is very unfortunate that this combination is so dangerous, because I think that it may well be the most useful therapeutic agent yet encountered by man, not to mention really interesting and fun. Anyways, if it should turn out that it's safe after all, I certainly hope that there is a deeper investigation into this combination. Until then, that is all. Mitra. Every Second is a Galaxy, an ayahuasca trip report by Sherlock Alien, posted to earwid.org November 29, 2007. It has been nearly a whole year since my last ayahuasca experience. In the year that passed, life brought me many learning experiences, and I was interested to see how much I'd really grown, and how much was just my ego thinking I had grown. A friend called me to say there was a shaman from an Amazon tribe passing a few days here, and it would be doing a ritual in a nature place in the farm of some other friend. I was immediately interested. The shaman was young in the consensual age count, 28 years old, but was a wise old man in an internal essence age, as I could see in his eyes the first moment I met him. I arranged a ride with the owner of the farm, and we went on Saturday afternoon, knowing the ritual would take place Saturday night, around 10 PM. What follows is a description of what I passed through. Even though I could only express an inkling of my experience, it became very long, so try to make it an interesting read, and hope you all enjoy it. The place and the people. It all took place in a circle in some forested area in this friend's farm, but close to the house in case someone needed a bathroom or something of the kind. In the middle of the circle there was a fire that was kept alive by one specific guy. Around it were trees, as well as the sound of insects and birds, and in the distance there was nice green hills to look at. It was in a total of 20 people, half of which I actually knew. It was really more people than I'd expected, which made me quite apprehensive since the group influences a lot about how the experience will go. There were about 5 people who were taking it for the first time, and all of the people in the ritual were reasonably young, in their 20s, and there were 6 females in the group. In Santo Daime rituals, normally they divide the circle so that one half of it is where the females are, and one half where the males are. They say it has an energetic reason, but the shamans don't do that in this tribe. It is a less rigid ritual, so the girls and the guys were sitting mixed. The girlfriends could stay next to their boyfriends as well. The shaman explained to the first timers a little bit how each person will go through their internal voyage, and how it may at some times get rough, but that he will be there taking care, and that the difficulties and also the purging and cleansing, vomiting, crying, sweating, nose running, is an important part of the process that some may have to go through. He also explained to those that didn't know that he would be singing in his own language, but that the language was not about us understanding the lyrics, but rather to feel the energy of the sounds. Each song had a definite objective, some to increase the visions, others to increase the strength, others to bring an inner peace, etc. He then said it would start soon, that we should all concentrate, and he went to walk around the circle a few times smoking his natural tobacco in a shamanic pipe. And so, it starts. The shaman took 2 glass bottles out of a bag with a thick brown liquid inside. He made some prayers in his native language and started giving to people. He gave a counterclockwise order, each time looking at the person first, then filling up the glass accordingly to how he felt it was needed for each person. In my turn, the first bottle was finished, and he was already on the second one. This made me a little apprehensive, wondering if it would actually be enough, especially since last time I took the first glass, it was not enough for the trip to start. How little did I really know. He filled up the glass almost to the top, and I drank it down in a few big gulps at once, feeling that very strong and particular taste. The shaman then started singing very low, and was gradually getting louder in the perfect timing as I started to feel the energy. This energy started like a peculiar lightheadedness and increased to a strong body feeling, almost as if my parts were melted together. Sometimes it was very hard getting out of a position, felt really stuck. One position I stayed for long moments, for example, was sitting down with my legs crossed, holding my face with both hands and with the elbows resting on my legs. Many times I lost sense of where my hands were, as well as where my face was, and I started having visions of fractals, shapes. After some time had passed, the shaman asked if those that were not feeling anything yet wanted to take a second dose. I was feeling it, but I said I wanted to anyway. I felt as if I wanted to go all the way down the hole, inspect my soul from the very beginning, and I gulped down the second glass, feeling that soon I would have one of the strongest experiences of my entire life. The eternally long peak. The visions had increased tenfold. The shaman's singing was incredible. I felt a very wise science in the chants. The songs were fractals in themselves, with a very intelligent mix of repetition and changes. He maintained certain tones for long, whilst others were really quick. There was nothing random about it. Some songs brought full visions like I wouldn't believe was possible. I was seeing worlds inside my eyes. It was very hard keeping my eyes open. I couldn't really stare at things. Too much light, even if it was night time, so I kept them shut most of the time. There were layers and layers and layers of some impressive dynamic, colourful material. Light emanated from every part, a light that contained all knowledge of existence. And then I saw them. There were beings, and they were all looking over me. They were very advanced, dynamic, colourful, but half transparent, so I couldn't really delineate where one ended and where another began. I started to feel a certain energy knot in my stomach, and they were looking straight at it. I noticed the knot slowly coming up, and I saw that it was the beings bringing this knot up. Felt like I wanted to vomit, to get that knot over and done with. But nah, you really think it's that easy? It was going slowly up, and I saw these beings operating me. It wasn't scary per se. It wasn't as if I was being abducted by aliens or something. It was beings of light I saw with my eyes closed, and I felt that they only wanted good. They were operating on my knot, and they were pointing at it. I had this definitive feeling and intuition that they were telling me that when this comes out, I was going to receive a present. And after I don't know how long, me being lost in myself stuck to where I was sitting with this half nausea, but half beautiful visions and light experience. I saw it was time to take it out. I stood up, God knows how, took 2 steps and started to vomit. It was really a cleansing, and I felt like I got rid of that stuck energy pattern. I was feeling like I wanted to pee for a very long time, so I used the opportunity to go to the bathroom too. As I was walking around, finally free from that bad feeling inside of me, I was receiving lessons after lessons. I had visions of myself sitting in the computer wasting hours and hours. I saw myself doing nothing, even when I was externally doing something, like doing my stretches or exercises, but having my mind already thinking of what to do next. I saw how much I should really do things, take initiative, use every second properly. And it was at this moment, I was on the way to the bathroom, and I ran into this guy that was also walking around a bit. I looked at him and said, "Man, we can't waste time. Gotta make life worth living, you know." And he answered me back, "I know, every second is a galaxy." We had read each other's minds. I continued my way with the lessons going over and over in my mind. I knew something had to be done when I got home, and I almost wanted to already be home so I could put it into practice. But there was much more to go through still. Over and over I was receiving lessons of me needing to make my life the best it could be. I wanted to be the best person in the universe. I felt like the most important question to continually ask myself was that if I died right now, would I truly be satisfied with this last second? I went back to the circle and listened to the shaman singing. was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. I wished he could sing forever. In normal height, he was smaller than a friend we nicknamed Dwarf, but as I was sitting there, I saw him as a giant. He was huge, infinite meters tall, watching all over us, singing songs from an ancient past. I visualized him with a bow and arrow, or a shield like a warrior. He was fearless and didn't hesitate for 1 second, even though he had the huge responsibility to deal with everyone's energy. Every once in a while, someone would vomit. This was a part of the ritual though, the language of the bowels. The incredible part was that the person was not alone in this. We were all there with them, whoever was going through purging. We were a unity. We had a strong energy string connecting us all. Every time someone was purging, we were giving them strength and love inside of us to persevere. I had just gone through the life worth living stage, and it seemed to be quieting down. The shaman said we'd make a pause. He went one by one around us, asking us how we were, if we needed anything, if we wanted to say something. He made jokes of us as well, saying we should go brush our teeth, take a shower, tasks that were obviously impossible to most of us, so we were all laughing along with him. It showed me even more how attentive he was to us. I wasn't just any guy there leading the session, and after a few minutes he said that now the last part would come. Whoever wanted to take another dose was free to do so. So of course, I went for it. I gulped a smaller glass in one sip and sat down in my place. The last and maybe strongest part was about to come. After a few minutes, I started having visions of animals. I saw life in all of its manifestations. I saw how it was all the same. All of these were God. Each form of life was me in that stage of evolution. I could see it in their very eyes. A vision of a butterfly came, and I saw God, or consciousness, or myself, trapped in the butterfly's body. I saw that part of the story where I was still a butterfly. This was followed by a vision of my dog, and I saw in her eyes how she was also consciousness, being received and transformed according to her innate possibilities. I felt sorry for my dog, for still having to go through so much evolution, so many lives, till she reaches the end. I thought of myself and how I'm further up the ladder, and I saw how this doesn't make it easier at all. The more we grow, the more responsibilities we have. We have to take account for everything that is below us, to be able to know everything that we have passed through until our stage in evolution. It is akin to pushing a coil, a spring of some kind, that the more you go forward, the more strength you have to make. I saw how life worked, like some sort of game. Just like we can visualize a game of chess, for example, I visualized what the game of life was really about. It is a non-linear story that we all go through, from single-celled organisms to complex animals like us humans, and then the inner evolution we humans have to go through. All forms of life are consciousness manifested in these particular bodies, having to go through the experience of that level, dying, being reborn, and it's a lot of suffering, a lot of learning, but the universe feeds on its very essence. In this interconnected system, each form of life is like an alchemical mechanism, receiving, transforming, and emanating certain vibrations needed for the evolution of that consciousness and for the cosmos itself. Life is an integral part of the universal balance. It all depends on us. While I was having these visuals, a friend touched me. I opened my eyes and he asked me to come with him. I went with him, and somewhere a bit farther away, the shaman was sitting down in the forest, and he asked us to join him. I lit up a joint I'd pre-rolled and we all started smoking. The shaman looked at me as if he knew what was just starting in my mind. As I sat down with them and closed my eyes, there came the negative visions. I felt all the excesses and non-harmonious things we humans do. I saw oil spills, murders, animal mistreating, dogs being beaten, pollution, fights, and I cried from the bottom of my heart. I cried so very strongly. and then it would get calmer again, to which I would cry once more, and this would occur in cycles. I felt the universe itself worked in some superimposed cycles, like gears connected to each other. It was the same with time, which is cyclic, as the Mayas saw it, even though from our perspective it gives the impression of a linear time. And the same it was for my suffering. It came and went with a rhythm. I felt like I had to go through it. I was going to see those things for as long as was necessary. I continuously went back to crying a lot, seeing all the shit humanity makes. I was like Atlas, holding the weight of all the earth, barely supporting. I saw Mother Earth being raped, and I was being crucified for it. I was paying right now for the world's karma, and it was not easy. The shaman the whole time sat next to me, watching over me. At some point he asked, "Do you think it's enough, and you want me to stop it? Or do you want to continue with discipline?" He was not just saying this. He really did have the power to stop my trip if he wanted to. I did think about stopping, but decided for the hard way, and I answered that I would continue. He nodded, accepting my decision. I continued to feel all these things for a while in cycles, but not in never-moving repetitive cycles, but rather like spirals that go back and forward and back again, slowly going up into higher levels of understanding. I finally realised why I was feeling that, so that I didn't repeat those mistakes, so that I made my contribution to the world. Everything we do, we have to think of the consequences not only for us or for the ones around us, but also for all the generations that are to come. Every decision must be done with all our great-great-great-great-grandchildren in mind. After this, the trip slowly settled down and the shaman closed the session. I could not help but feel thankful for all of these visions I experienced. Even with all the hard parts, it came with a feeling of hope, of a positive responsibility, and of a desire for getting better. I am truly glad that I had this opportunity, and I will try to put in practice all I have learned from it. Thank you all for reading. A recent salvia experience has me believing entities exist in another realm. A post on the Salvia Stories subreddit by the user Tincash, posted 5 years ago. I was at a smoke shop getting some things when my eyes saw it. Salvia. It had been 10 years since the last time I'd used it, and for some reason, I just bought it on the spot. I guess I hadn't seen it in some time. I was just kind of bored after getting off of work. I said whatever, and got some 15x extract. Once I finally got home, I was ecstatic to give salvia another try, so I loaded myself a pretty hefty sized bowl in a pipe and ripped it. Held the smoke in for a bit and started to walk forward as I exhaled. And that's when it struck. I literally took 2 steps out of the kitchen and into the living room, and everything just kind of went blank. I then remember just feeling like my body was strands of material swirling to the left and into one particular area. Once I saw and felt this happening to me, I kind of came back into my living room. Still standing up, I noticed an entity to my left. The strength of how real it felt that there was someone there with me was unbelievable. I've tried shrooms and acid. I've never felt something like that in them. It seriously just blew me away. I was alone, but this presence just felt real. Didn't feel like a trip. I was still frozen and contorted to the left when they arrived. I noticed that they were the ones behind me, turning my body into what felt like spaghetti noodles and ushering me into a certain focal point. The one to my left was a clown wearing blue. He was taller than I was. I'm 5'8", and he was playing some type of instrument that sounded like an accordion, and as he played it, I was sucked further into this void. Then there was a smaller one dressed in all orange, hiding behind my bedroom door, and it seemed to be shooting some type of spiraling ribbon that was connected to my body, turning me into a spiral ribbon as well. It was the best way for them to get me into this void. This is when I started to fight back. I realised I'm seeing some crazy ass shit right now. I remember that I'm just being frozen, staring at this little orange clown, feeling like the blue clown was getting impatient now that I was fighting back. I could even hear him tapping his fingers in the counter, waiting for this process to finish so they could take me to this place or whatever it was. The smaller clown seemed to get discouraged, and I was just simply not going along with their plans. Felt like we had communicated this telepathically, because I didn't actually ask if they were real. I was just thinking it. And the blue clown seemed to give off an attitude as if he'd been through this thousands of times before. You could tell he was getting sick of this. And he told me that they are real, telepathically, and wanted this process to hurry up now. I started to drool, still dumbstruck, paralysed staring at the little orange clown as I was trying to peel off these ribbons he was shooting at me. I even physically felt the feeling of something peeling off of me. It was soon after this that they faded away. I was quite disappointed that they'd left, so I just ripped another fat bowl to see if they'd come back. And then, once more, I was stuck in the kitchen. I started to trip again. I was in front of a circular-looking yellow tarp where my bar counter was at. It was starting to suck me in much like the first time. There seemed to be some kind of operator behind it as well. I wasn't sure if it was the orange clown's doing, but I remember seeing these parallel lines separating rectangular segments that turned from yellow to white and back to yellow. It looked as if there was a focal point to this too, and it was sucking everything in like a vortex. I was nervous. I started to hear the same accordion music come back as I began to get sucked into the void. Then I just remembered that I didn't want to leave everyone I knew behind here, so I quickly grabbed my phone. I didn't want to part from my wife into this unknown hole, so I think I fought back. I was sweating like a motherfucker, and that's when I really got smacked by Sally. I just remember running into the living room by the window, taking off my clothes because of all the sweat, and then I was stuck once more. The blue clown came back and he was making me bend downwards. The weirdest thing about this was that he was making me move down in a rhythm whilst he played the accordion. It was just that noise where something plays, stops, builds up more and more and gets higher pitched as it goes on. He seemed so excited to see me in this trance, as every note was taking me away from here. I was seeing into this other realm when the music would play, and then I'd be back here once it stopped. So it felt like this feeling was slowly devouring me. This time when I was seeing into another place, I was all of a sudden looking at a blue sky and some green grass and trees. There appeared to be something like a white RV. It was to the left of me, but it was all distorted looking, like an oil pastel painting if I could try and describe it. I also felt like I saw people's faces that I knew, but it seemed unfamiliar to me seeing what I think was people I knew just meshed into this oil pastel vision. It was very disorienting. It felt to me like the blue clown just peeled back the corners of my vision and forced me to see this place. Or maybe it was akin to my vision being a page, and the clown made it flip to another page with his accordion. After this had transpired, it appeared like I was back at home, but it was completely empty. and all I could really see was a round, huge yellow disc on the ground. It looked like it was made out of thick rubber, and it was spinning with another strange clown entity operating it. Again, this entity was trying to get me to go to wherever it wanted me to be. When they do this to me, try and get me to go, I feel like I'm a texture or something. Like my body is this big Ferris wheel and I'm spinning out of my body, feeling like I'm made of plastic as well. It seems when I realise what's happening in a fight, I can feel the texture of myself being peeled away and just seeing pure white. I was also seeing and feeling some form of disappointment from these entities. I got upset because I didn't actually want to go, and I jerked away with anger and yelled, "I ain't gonna go anywhere." And then, just like that, the trip seemed to fade away. I was feeling slightly nauseous and weak after all this crazy shit had happened to me. But what blows me away is how real these things felt. I honestly don't think I was tripping. I think I was in some sort of new plane of existence. A different dimension or parallel universe of sorts. I honestly, truly believe that these beings are real. I just can't shake this feeling it's been giving me. I've never felt anything like that before in my life. Just the presence of something I don't know or understand being so damn real. There was something there with me, and I was there with them. Where did they want me to go? What would happen to me if I went? It actually gives me a feeling like if I had gone with them, I wouldn't be able to come back and see everybody I love. It felt like death in a sense. Naivety resulting in ego death. A DMT and mushrooms trip report by Ash. Posted to earwid.org December 15th, 2018. I'm a lightweight. I had what my appetite with psilocybin and felt as though there was more to experience in the realm of psychedelics. I could count on one hand how many times I tripped on mushes before my descent into DMT, but I was determined to break through on the first go. I ate some mushrooms beforehand, about 3 stems and 4 caps, and prepared to smoke the DMT. I used a gravity bong and got all 60 milligrams in one hit. As the smoke hit my lungs, my vision funneled and the ringing began. I was scared out of my head as soon as it occurred to me I was going under. I held the whole hit for at least 7 seconds. Immediately, the world went black. I lost all feeling in my body. I couldn't perceive the room around me, despite my eyes being open, and I was essentially dead. Slowly, threads of reality were fed to me, and I heard an entity introduce itself. I could slowly grasp my own consciousness, and as it was fed back into my mind, I held on to every shred of being that I could. The sensations of light, dark, colour, sound. I realised I was dead, and life was tangibly within reach. I latched on for dear life, even when I had no idea who I was or why this was happening to me. And then I could start to see once more. Whispers of light broke open the wall of black, and I slowly waded through the murky ether until I could perceive a room around me. It was pure white. The entity from earlier was sitting before me, and I could put a face to the voice. It was humanoid, a being of electric, undulating white light. It was warm and kind, and I instantly perceived it as a friend. I felt like I was dying, so I asked, "You're not dying. This is DMT." I didn't remember taking any drugs, didn't know what DMT was, didn't know why I was in a white space with a being of light, but I felt reassured. There was a fear, insistent at the back of my mind, telling me that this was the afterlife, to hold on to my humanity as long as I could. I was scared. I didn't know who I was. I was a fresh consciousness plucked from the nothing, and I feared ever having to return to that state of no cognitive selfness. My body felt heavy, fuzzy, a bit like lead. I was electrified, and I felt every nerve as if it were TV static. I kept fading in and out. The entity stood and approached me at an imperceptible speed. I asked it again. Am I dying? It reassured me that I wasn't. It started counting. I felt like I was falling down, away from the light, into the ground, buried as my body continued to collapse. With each number that the entity said, I knew it was counting down the time to my death. So I fought it. Fought the lead in my limbs. Fought the static in my mind, my body. And eventually, I fought enough to see nothing but pure light. The entity was happy and it put its hands on my face, leading me down a 4-dimensional tunnel in which I experienced every human memory and emotion almost simultaneously. I felt safe. I felt happy. I felt loved. I was overwhelmed with the assurance that life is the most beautiful, precious gift that a creature may receive. I get it, I kept chanting, as more memories were flooded into my mind. They weren't my memories per se, from my life before the DMT trip. They were every memory of every being, big and small. I had no sense of identity, but I felt as though I was being constructed by God in real time. I had experienced the cognitive evolution that a young human goes through during the first 25 years of their life, all at once. I realized instantly the weight of consciousness. I could perceive it, which is something I took with me once I left the trip. The entity began to multiply, each one feeling like an angel. They were stark in form, gender ambiguous, though decidedly nude. No genitals, no facial distinctions, though they did have faces, just not that any of them were familiar or perceivable with the lucid mind. The many entities held me in their arms as they carried me down a line, one hug passing me to the next, until I reached the last of the line, me. I thought I had died and been initiated into the afterlife. In truth, this was the end of the most vivid part of my hallucination. I fell off the couch I was tripping on, and became instantly reminded of reality. The shrooms had kicked in, and I could see the room around me, breathing, undulating, achingly familiar and estranged. Where was I? Who was I? Who was it in the room with me right now? My trip sitter, who was alien but still familiar, reminded me of his name, but it honestly meant nothing. I didn't remember who he was, just that he could be trusted. I tethered myself to him and rocked to and fro, desperate for the alienness of the experience to be over. I wanted to know who I was. I wanted to know I was safe. You are Ash. This is your apartment. You are not dying. You took DMT. It'll be over in 15 minutes. Reality was stuck on a feedback loop. I was tossed wall to wall. The room changed around me. I floundered on the rug, fingers digging into the fibrous material in a lame attempt to ground myself, but each attempt was in vain. The room would simply not sit still. My trip-sitter would repeat himself, saying what he had just said 2 seconds ago, and then I would repeat myself. My thoughts themselves would repeat. I wish things would just stop repeating, I kept saying. Everything that left my mouth was repeated. I just want it to stop. He would then kindly inform me that the trip was almost over. It's almost over, I asked. Yes, just 20 more minutes now. But you said 15 minutes 20 minutes ago. I know, but it's almost over now. It's almost over. Yes, just 20 more minutes. You said 20 minutes 5 minutes ago. In reality, only 2 seconds had passed. Well, that's right. That's because it's 20 minutes ago. The frustration I was feeling right now was unending. I knew something was wrong. He shouldn't be repeating himself. I was mad at myself for doing this to myself, and I felt suffocated by the insincerity of reality. Why couldn't things just behave normally? Who was I? When would it end? It was at this point the trip tapered off. I was still experiencing mild visuals, and the repetition of sounds, words, scenes, and thoughts would intermittently spring up. But I was mostly in my lucid state. I remembered who I was. I remembered that I smoked DMT. The shrooms right now were mixing nicely, bringing a more intense visual effect. But I was cold, colder than I've ever been before, and I sobbed uncontrollably. In my bewildered state, I had scratched deep marks into my hands, face, and neck, leaving noticeable red lines. I huddled in a mass of blankets, suddenly very heavy as I let my body rest. It was then that my trip sitter broke down too, and both of us experienced my unfiltered reaction to death, which shook us to the core. The trip itself haunts me. I don't regret it, but as a young atheist, I took DMT with the sincere hope that it would quell the existential horror I felt knowing that there was no afterlife. Instead, I felt burdened by the realization that I am tethered to my physicality and consciousness until the day I die, and I am intimately familiar with what consciousness is. I cannot put this into words in a satisfactory manner, but I hope anyone reading this understands my fear. It's the Lacanian real, and it's painful to acknowledge it. However, I am recovering, and I intend to keep experimenting with psychedelics, with eventually another DMT blast-off. For the time being, I am sober and will be for a while. I am still an atheist, though I'm realizing my understanding of the universe is extremely limited. If there truly is a God, it is energy, it is omnipresent, and it exists within every living creature. I still don't have the answers, but if I ever figure it out, I'll return with a new report. The following is a 30-month follow-up to my report, a first-timer's foray into ego death. So first, a quick disclaimer. This is an updated report to provide more insight, clarity, and specificity to my Dimitri experience that happened in November of 2018. I had a challenging experience, and I want my report to serve as a case study into how even exhaustive preparation and safety nets don't always lead to a positive experience. When I wrote my first report, I did not know the amount I had actually taken, and omitted a lot of key details due to my emotional proximity to the experience. I've done much writing and reflection on the vision I endured, and used that to back up this report. This will be longer than my original retelling. I thought I'd consumed 50 to 60 milligrams of NN-DMT, when in fact, I'd consumed 165 milligrams. My trip sitter was the person who kept me grounded and from hurting myself during the experience, to whom I am truly grateful for protecting me. But my trip sitter was also the one who overdosed me. I've spent the last few years in and out of therapy and integrating my experience as a rigorous daily ritual. Now, onto the experience. I'd done mushrooms a handful of times, and after rigorous research into the compound DMT, decided it was what I wanted to do next. Go big or go home, right? I was spiritually vacant back then, and had heard through others' trip reports that there were these grandiose colours, machine elves that communicated love, and all of these lovely sights that could be taken back into sobriety. It seemed comforting, and I wanted that, to which I figured, with diligent set in setting protocols, I could have this positive experience, and fully avoid the disturbing ones I had also read about. So I began to clean up my living room space. I invited my trip sitter and set up the scene for maximum safety and comfort. I had a couch with blankets, water and fruit, as well as calming ambient music on in the background. I whetted my appetite with a few heads and stems of mushrooms I had for backup, and my friend loaded up our jury-rigged gravity bong with the 165 milligrams on top of a bed of oregano. I counted on the inhale, holding the smoke, which is harsh, tastes like burnt plastic, much like others say, and I held it in for 8 seconds before I began to black out. It was a nearly instant drop from cognizance to complete blackness. I felt heavy, and my trip sitter later informed me that my eyes were open the entire trip. I was wiped clean. I had no conception of myself at all. I was this atom of consciousness tethered to nothing in an immense blackness. It's like free-floating in space, but you feel crushed by the nothingness around you. I felt small, confused. I began to register my consciousness that I was alive, but with no real concept of what you are. Uninhibited awareness is quite frightening. You react with the same primordial anxiety as when you can't sleep at night and contemplate your existence. Who am I? Am I dying? These were the two pervasive questions. I felt my smallness grow into something more substantial. I was becoming, and so the answers became with me. They swelled up and consumed me, as light began to slowly break through this sludgy anti-place. It was like holes being poked in a blanket I was under, and light could finally shine through them. When the blackness was gone, I was suspended in a white room with one figure before me. Carved from undulating white, a lightning rod of energy and vitality. They were human in form and looked familiar. They didn't communicate through speaking, but through the thoughts in my head. They introduced themselves, and I remember feeling scared.
The thing about the DMT-fueled sensorium is it is wholly defined by its alienness,
much like Terence McKenna once said. You cannot articulate it within or without it, but you experience it. And experiencing something so alien with none of your reasoning or identity to save you from its randomness will harrow you. I directed all my questions to this figure of light, who didn't have a face, but assured me they were a friend. I trusted them. They were all I had to trust in this moment. My trip sitter later asked if it was him that I saw in the vision. For a while, I thought it might have been him, but upon much reflection, I think it was an introjection of my subconscious, or one of those machine elves we hear so much about. But they weren't intimately familiar. They were distantly familiar, primordial, almost angelic. This gentle guide stood imperceptibly and approached, taking me by the hands and introduced me to life. The vision erupted in colours, and along a tunnel I travelled through, being fed memories I had never seen before, but felt like they were my own. It began spinning me, twirling me, dipping me as if it were dancing, and somehow, while I was entrenched in this tango, they bequeathed me with knowledge that I cannot articulate, as well as colours I'll never see again, and emotions too ineffable to recount. Overwhelmed to my core by the immensity and intensity of this beauty, I felt grateful, existentially, for what I was being shown. However, equal and opposite forces are present in the DMT realm. I was thrown from beauty to terror on the flip of a dime, and back again, and back again. The questions re-emerged and persisted. Am I dying? I asked my guide, but they smiled and said no. This is DMT. I didn't know what DMT was, but their response was comforting. I began to associate DMT with a sort of god. DMT was what I was experiencing, and it was so sublime and so kind, I didn't want to take it for granted. But then, I felt whatever was grounding me disappear, and once more I fell into the black again. This time though, with all the knowledge and experience already imprinted in my mind. I didn't want to lose it. I heard a countdown as I fell into the dark, and I felt myself return to that smallness once more. I fought with every ounce of life within me to resist this fate. Before the countdown could reach 0, the guide caught me in their arms, and once more I was held, I was safe. The guide then seemingly multiplied, passing me from one guide to another, and they held me, moving me upwards a chain of themselves straight into the sky. At this point, the experience had thoroughly taxed me. I felt I could only take so much stimulation. The binary of pleasant and unpleasant sensations had drained me, and that sinking fear that I would be returned to the blackness, to my death, became more and more loud in my mind. I convinced myself that when the chain ended, and I was the last being in line, I would be committed to the afterlife, whatever it may be. However, something strange happened. The link between vision and reality had severed. I had fallen off the couch I was resting on, eyes still open, and suddenly I was aware of the room I was in. The DMT visuals were intense. Geometry on the walls, a sickeningly neon yellow painted each object in the room, and it was so very alien. My trip sitter was in front of me, sitting cross-legged on my living room rug. I'd never done psychedelics to this intense of a degree before or since. The room moved and breathed around me. The floor would fall underneath me, only for me to land on another iteration of the floor. I still couldn't remember myself, but now this new figure in front of me, who I didn't recognize, seemed like my saving grace. When I could finally hold the room long enough for it to stop swaying and phasing out beneath me, I launched myself at him and held on for dear life. I was much more frightened by this part of the trip. In the vision, I surrendered to the experience and had no control of myself. Here, I could navigate this shifting reality, but nothing was safe. Nothing made sense, and reality began repeating itself. I had never heard about this phenomenon in psychedelia until after my trip was over. But my trip sitter would say something, or I'd say something, or even just think something, and the words or thoughts would repeat themselves, like a song skipping on a record. The insincerity of reality truly terrified me. I thought I would be stuck in this nonsensical world forever. I would ask him, where am I? Who am I? What's happening to me? And so on and so forth, with his answers changing as well as repeating. You're Ash, you took DMT, and you'll be okay. It'll be over soon. I asked how soon. 5 minutes. A whole eternity would pass, and I'd ask, has it been 5 minutes? No, it's been 2. And a moment later he'd say, it's going to be okay. Only 20 more minutes. I have not been able to verify the reality behind this. He remembers my confusion and answering my questions, but I cannot vouch for his authenticity. For all I know, he was telling me different time intervals. I had to trust him in my bewildered state. Holding him became too intense, so I would stand, pace the room, and claw at my neck for whatever reason, leaving deep welts in my skin that lasted a few days after. I would bounce between intense emotions. I would be laughing or entranced in beautiful sensations, only to fall to my knees as my body was overwhelmed with static and lead. With my head in my hands, I cried and said I feel like I'm dying. I didn't have the ability to articulate myself outside of asking for reassurance while I waited for the effects to wear off. It took entirely too long for me to come down, and I was later informed that the vision and the ensuing episode once I was back in my living room lasted 40 minutes. This is quite long for even a high-dose DMT trip. I guess it could have been from the mixture of DMT and shrooms. I crawled back onto the couch by minute 40 and wrapped myself in the blanket. I had never felt so cold or tired in my life. The looping effect would occur at increasingly distant intervals until it tapered away completely, I was back in my conscious mind again. I remembered my name, remembered the drugs I took, remembered my friend, my life, my apartment. The relief of my identity returning was all I needed to recover from the trip. The shrooms lasted another 5-ish hours, and I felt a deep pain in my chest, and my breaths were laboured from the smoke I inhaled. I didn't say much for the rest of his visit. He was supposed to go after me, but the experience shook him just as much as it did me. He smoked a bowl of cannabis and cried. We watched the Netflix loading screen on my couch, and he gave me food before leaving around 9 p.m. I started the trip at 1 p.m. I have mostly accepted this experience now. I acquired PTSD from it and worked with 2 different therapists and a psychiatrist to cope with it all. And now I am in a better place and cannot imagine I'll ever do DMT again. While I'd say I learnt a lot from this trip and don't think of it as a wholly net negative, I do know better now. Sometimes you cannot control the outcome of a drug-induced episode. All I do know is that I prefer to live with my new identity and not to keep experimenting. Interdimensional Alien Contact, an LSD trip report by HP, posted to earwid.org March 29, 2017. Setting: New England, Australia. Mindset: apprehensive but open-minded. Had previous high-dose LSD experiences twice in the month prior to the trip that had been very thought-provoking and strange. It was Christmas Eve, and my partner and I had decided to spend it away from our families and closer to nature. We'd travelled out of town to our favourite spot. It was a hot summer's day, but you could feel in the air that in the afternoon we would have a thunderstorm. The area we were in was beautiful. It was mostly open pastures nestled between the mountains, and there were very few people around. Creeks, rivers and brooks weaved the valley floor, and we spent most of the morning exploring indigenous sites in the surrounding valleys. We had lunch at the local pub and a few beers before dropping the acid in the early afternoon. These were by far the strongest tabs I've ever had, and I cannot even guess what the dose actually was. But one of these tabs was enough to catapult me towards another reality. Prior to tripping, I had some reservations about the coming weather. The clouds were looming large and thunder was echoing in the distance. However, common sense was outweighed by a desire to dive deeper into hyperspace. Previous experiences with this batch of tabs had yielded vivid, Aztec-like sacred geometries that I've experienced simply by using cannabis, maybe some lingering HPPD, but either way, it's quite pleasant. As we dosed up and rolled out the picnic blanket, we sat watching some cattle graze in an adjacent field. I checked my phone and sure enough, the icons began to merge and morph and dance on the screen. This is it, I thought. As the trip really started to accelerate, I had a feeling that I was heading into an alien unknown. It was at this point the storm began. A light rain fell, and for the most part it was pleasant. But as the acid kept increasing in intensity, the rain became more of a menace. Eventually the rain picked up, and we, having no shelter beside the small tent, decided to sit in the car and wait it out. It was hardly an ideal place to trip. I sat in the car and watched the cattle unfazed by the storm. I had hoped that the storm would pass. We would be able to sit outside as the damp air and hot weather had made the car somewhat of a sauna. However, the rain increased in intensity, and I sat there thinking, here they come. Feeling as though a presence was breaking through reality to try and make contact with us. My visuals at first were of closed eye only. These small black squares had started to appear and spin rapidly, forming complex geometric patterns. They seemed to invite me to follow them, and I refused. Instead, focusing on other things and steering the closed-eye visuals. Failing to shake the black squares, I opened my eyes and stared at the rain falling on the windshield. The rain slowly became overtaken by this pattern, a common experience we had both had staring at our bathroom wall whilst tripping. The pattern was a cobweb-like image that becomes apparent particularly on textured surfaces on moderate doses of LSD. It appears to spread centrally from the visual field in a T-like configuration, and prolonged focusing on the pattern tends to increase its intensity, and slowly it will begin to spread and fill the visual field entirely, interacting with the surrounding environment as well. This pattern, for me, is associated with information being transferred. So it was at this point I was seeing the pattern, then those little black squares became apparent in the raindrops and they began to align along the vertices of the pattern itself. It was by now that my partner was enjoying watching the cows whilst I was fighting back a complete breakdown of my reality. I knew the experience was becoming too intense for me to resist, so I just decided to go with it. And after a while I felt the intensity drop slightly, and I became more comfortable with the headspace I was currently in. The pattern persisted, but the pulling sensation from the squares had stopped. In fact, they seemed to have retreated. But it was by now that the body high was becoming intense. I felt hot, thirsty, and my whole body itself felt like it was glowing. As we'd been tripping for about an hour or two now, we decided to smoke a J at what we estimated was the peak of the experience. Previous experiences with J's and acid had resulted in an electrified feeling with synesthesia, as well as colour splitting, increased 3D open-eyed visuals, amongst other things. We were very keen right now to replicate these effects and observe them in further detail. The rain was still pouring, but the car was becoming uncomfortable, so we suited up in the most rainproof clothing we had on hand, none of which bar one raincoat was actually weatherproof. That being said, we had hit our tripping stride and took it all as part of the fun. We set out with Jay in hand to smoke by the river and enjoy the ensuing light show. Basically, from here on out, the rain just continued to increase in its intensity. Once we'd found a nice tree to stand under, we lit our little dude up and happily blazed it while staring into the bushland. Now, this is where things get weird. I started to see the pattern again, so I asked my partner what they were seeing. They described to me that they were seeing the bathroom wall pattern spreading out over everything, and I told them that I saw the same thing. Then in the centre of the pattern, an icosahedron or hexagon-like shape began to emerge, and it was spinning and covered itself in Aztec patterns. I described it to them, and they reported seeing the exact same thing. Fascinated by the shared visual experience, we kept discussing the pattern and the shape we were seeing. At this point, I felt as though we'd entered some kind of Goosebumps episode. Two kids sneaking out, smoking weed, seeing this alien object. This thought really stuck in my mind and basically consumed my reality from here on out. As we observed the visual phenomena together, I noticed that the shape had begun replicating, and it was now forming a grid. If you search an icosahedron grid, you'll see some similar depictions of what we saw. My partner also reported seeing this grid emerge. We kept relaying to each other our experience and what we were observing, and the grid appeared to expand infinitely in all directions through the earth and up into the sky. Both of us recognised the grid, and we both recognised that we stood on sections of it, and continued to confirm what we were both observing. As we continued to examine the visual phenomena we were experiencing, we both saw a black square emerge from the centre of a section of the grid. I asked my partner what they made of it, and they just said that it was everything. All religion, all life, all beliefs, all things. And I confirmed that was the same impression I was getting. Pretty spooky. It's by now that I had a flash where I could see a torus with lights ascending and descending it. It was a representation of the cycle of life and death, and the infinite nature of existence and consciousness. As the flash passed, the black square became much larger and formed a tunnel at this point, so we decided to move on, because we were both getting really tripped out and felt like we were being beckoned by the grid. We also realised that we were soaked from the rain and should probably find shelter by now. As we turned to walk back along the road to the campsite, I observed the grid in the sky, but in the sky, between two mountains, there was a large icosahedron. It stood out of the grid and took on the significance of its own in my mind. On this return walk, things became more and more intense. The pooling water on the ground was glowing green, blue and magenta. It appeared these three colours were being projected off everything around us and were streaming into our very bodies. The colours were made up of small packets of hollow squares that spun in response to external sounds. It was then that I felt as if we were being followed by something. I had this unshakable feeling that there was this object floating above us, a bit like that green spinning gem from The Sims or something along those lines, and it was trying to communicate something to us. We headed back to the campsite and took shelter under a pagoda. I was now in full trip mode, teetering on the edge of reality itself. We stood holding each other, trying to look as straight as possible. We both felt as though we were ascending, that we were about to take off land and go somewhere else entirely, and by now, I had completely bought into my alien abduction narrative, piecing together the puzzle that we had found ourselves in. We'd gone camping in bad weather conditions, ill-prepared, dressed inappropriately, and had taken psychedelics. I thought to myself, maybe this is it. This is how you exit our reality. This is what must happen to those couples that report being abducted. This idea less than impressed my partner, and I'd completely shit on their trip and spun them into this negative space. As for me though, well, I was completely convinced that we were about to be abducted by aliens. Behind my head I could feel them. Felt as though sharp surgical instruments were probing my mind. Crunching, grinding sounds were filling my skull, and I could even smell DMT. I felt bubbles travelling up my spine, right through the back of my neck. I closed my eyes, and the tunnel that I had seen smoking DMT suddenly appeared, and peering through was this odd face. The rising tones and high-pitched ringing set in, and I felt that same beckoning feeling once more. I resisted it though. I didn't want to go, even though I really did. I knew that if I went with it, I would collapse. I was already freezing cold and soaking wet. There were other campers around, and I'd draw too much attention to myself if I would just collapse here and now. Besides, the only explanation I'd be able to offer for my present condition would be aliens, and that would surely end with a trip to the emergency department. My partner was now quite concerned, and suggested we move elsewhere. We returned to our tent to lie down, but found it flooded. To me, this was another synchronistic sensation. They wanted us to go with them. My partner, despite how scared they later told me they were, handled all of this really well. We ended up back in the car in our underwear, drying ourselves out and trying to survive. In the car, we continued to have these incredible visions of the grid, as well as of eternity of life, death, and rebirth. But eventually, after nearly 8 hours of insanity, I finally felt the ability to sleep. So when the rain stopped, we went back to the tent and began the long spiral back to Earth. Some of the other sensations experienced through this trip involved complete dissociation with reality, a sense of lost time, and a very real sense that reality was a projection of the mind. I felt as if me and my partner were somehow one, that we shared a reality and a destiny, that everything was an illusion, that we could ascend to become part of the grid, as well as consciousness being eternal in nature, somehow linked to the grid itself. Well, I must say, this was a very long and strange trip indeed. To Heaven and Back, a methadone and ibogaine trip report by Jason. posted to earwid.org May 10th, 2006. For the umpteenth time, I was reducing off the methadone. I got down to 25 milligrams, and then unfortunately, I started using once again. I then went up to 60 milligrams. This was very depressing, wanting to get off the methadone, and knowing that I would have to reduce again and go through all of this all over. As we know, to reduce from 60 milligrams down to 25 milligrams is much easier than that from 25 milligrams to 0. If I can't handle going to 25 milligrams, how am I going to go from 25 milligrams to nothing? I don't think I can do this anymore. I've been trying for so many years. I was quickly losing interest in living. I just wanted to go home to the other side. Being addicted to opiates for 23 years has become too much to bear. I was at my wit's end. I was giving up and going down fast. One day, soon after, in utter despair, I had a thought come into my head. Hang in there. It's almost over. Being desperate to be pulled out of the ocean of addiction, I held on to that thought. How exactly could this nearly be over? It'll take another year at least to reduce to 60 milligrams. But the thought kept coming to me over and over again. Hang in there, it's almost over. I started to get some hope back. I thought the only way this can be over quick is if I find a great rehab and come straight off the stuff. I now believe the voice in my head was my brother who had passed on. He'd also battled with addiction all his life. I started to search the internet and found this great rehab in the States that uses some of Ron Hubbard's techniques. Nutrition, sauna, and other things. I had heard of this type of treatment before, and I was hopeful. I contacted them and spoke to this great guy, who unfortunately I cannot remember the name of. This man told me that I needed to detox before coming to the rehab, and advised me a couple of methods, one of which being the controversial Ibogaine or Iboga, and it gave me a URL to an Ibogaine site. I logged onto this site and started talking to some of the people, and reading as much as I could absorb on Ibogaine. I was fortunate to be able to talk to a few people before treatment, as well as during and after. The surge of hope flowing through me was incredible. I could finally see a way out. I was getting goosebumps. I applied for a loan and got it. I spoke to some providers and then rang S in Amsterdam. It was then booked and organised. I took 600 milligrams of Ficeptone with me, basically methadone in a tablet, and worked out that if I triple dosed for the next 3 days or so, I would be finished with them as I got to Sarah's, the final stone on opiates before detoxing. I got to Amsterdam airport and was warmly greeted with a hug from S. We jumped into the car and drove to her place. I gave S what little Ficeptone I had left. But when I got to S's, the fear started to set in. This was it. Oh shit, what am I doing here? I don't think I can actually do this. Nah, I can't do this, I have to go back. For the next few hours, I was trying to figure out how I was going to get back at all. S could see how utterly scared I was and started to calm me. I would have rathered a bear came into the camp to attack, as I could have seen what I was facing. I stayed the night and woke in the morning very anxious. Fuck. No methadone. Can't go back and face everyone not having at least tried this though, I guess. Started to get a little sick in the afternoon, and S gave me my first dose of 1 gram of Iboga extract. I laid down, and after about 1 hour, I started to feel relaxed and more at ease with the Iboga, a slight vibrating sensation. Knowing this was a very spiritual plant, I gave thanks with each dose and asked for guidance. An hour or two later, I was given 1.8 grams. The vibrating became more and more intense, and I felt a low-pitched buzzing in my head and a vibration in my body. very relaxing and no withdrawals. About an hour or two later, I was then given 3 grams, and the low frequency type of vibrating became more intense. And then I found myself in the jungle, or somewhere similar to it. I was on a mat on the ground, and there were 7 or 8 tribespeople on each side of it. They picked me up on the mat and started wobbling it, side to side. I knew in that moment that they were healing me. I was vibrating and saw my cells being vibrated. Within my cells were dark blockages, little bits of black in these brilliant white cells, as I was being wobbled side to side, and I could see my cells vibrating more and more. The blackness started to vibrate out of my cells, and the dark blockages were being dissipated to the sides of the cells and disappearing. It was then that I was given 5 grams, and after a while there was like this explosion, and I found myself on a round medallion type of thing about 8 feet in diameter, like a huge coin of sorts. I was spread-eagled on this medallion and could not move, arms and legs all spread out. One side of this medallion was a brilliant white, and the other side was pitch black. The medallion started to flip whilst going up, and then it stopped on an angle facing up at about 120 degrees. And then it felt like people put their hands inside my body, my bones from my back, and then they ripped away with a crack. And as this happened, the back of the medallion, which was pitch black, snapped away. And even though I was still spread-eagled on the coin, I felt myself falling into this pitch-black abyss. This feeling of falling, and at the same time, knowing I was also on the medallion feeling safe. The feeling of falling disappeared, and yet I was still on the medallion. The medallion was now only a brilliant white. It started to flip again and go up, making this type of sound as it went up, like a woof, woof, woof. The medallion came to a stop, and I was facing this most beautiful light. Love, acceptance. More than light, more than love. Do not have the words to explain such a sight. A vast light like a liquid love. So bright, so expansive. I was a little concerned, and I was told there is nothing to fear. Face the light. And as I did, the light which was everything in that existence, there was nothing else at all. It started to move towards me, and then went through me, and what a feeling that was. I started to get champagne bubbles of light going through me, up from my stomach, splitting at the base of my heart, exiting through my shoulders. Shrink, shrink, shrink. It was like I had to be cleansed before going any further. It was like trying to mix 14 karat gold with 24 karat gold. If one does, they taint the pure gold. And so I was smelted, purified, so to say. One of my brothers was killed about 2 years ago. As I was in this light, I saw his head. It was moving from side to side, with these white flames coming off his head like locks of white liquid light. His mouth did not move, but he was speaking to me. There was light coming from his eyes and from his closed mouth, like he was facing a fan, and the fan was blowing his hair, but it wasn't exactly his hair. "You cannot die," he said to me. "You simply leave your body behind and vibrate into another dimension. I am still alive, just in another dimension now. If you truly want to honor my name, live life to the fullest, and I will live through you until you come home." The love pouring from him was incredible. He was incredible, and so beautiful. I still see him clearly. I was shown I am one with everything, and I felt it. I was told I can experience anyone that ever was or is, yet who do I wish to experience? I wanted to feel what it would be like to be Jesus. And as I thought this, I was coming into a body from above. This being of light had white light as hair saddling his shoulders. And as I entered this body of light, I got this tremendous feeling of love coming out of my mouth and outstretched hands. Like beacons of light coming from my hands, and a tremendous feeling of love and compassion within, being sent out within this world. Whoa. I was falling in love with love itself. This was pure and utter bliss. And as I woke up, I felt as if my heart was outside of my body. It was turned inside out and twisted a little like a gene. I went to get up, and as I did, it felt like I would leave my heart behind if I moved too fast. A bit like how your stomach would feel as you go down a roller coaster. And for the next 24 hours or so, I had to cradle my heart outside of my body, like it was my heart's spirit. I would lay down cradling what looked like an empty space above my chest, which I felt was my heart outside my body. It felt red raw, inside out, twisted, and it hurt. After about 24 hours or so, my heart felt like it was untwisting and going back inside me. Then something started to fill my heart with what looked and felt like liquid golden honey. They filled it until my heart overflowed with love. I could feel the liquid honey overflowing and trickling down. The feeling of this was so filling, and the love I felt was more than anything I can honestly describe in words. For the next 7 days, I had no withdrawals. My energy was non-existent though, and I couldn't sleep. After about 7 days, I started to feel some withdrawals, about 5%. And not sleeping was driving me mad. I was so very bored. I was listening to a lot of music, day and night. A lot of Pink Floyd's The Division Bell. I was so happy though. I'm free. Fuck me, I can't believe it. Wow. I kept thinking this over and over and would cry with joy. I'm free. I'm finally free. After about 3 weeks, I had approximately up to 15% withdrawals. However, they were different this time. Not at a soul level, more physical. Like I was just sick and recovering. I stayed at S's for 27 days, and in this time took nutrients and S cooked yummy food. Now I am into my 4th month. I still feel a little not right, however, but I am getting stronger every day. Please bear in mind I have had 23 years of addiction and came off methadone due to this. My aftercare consists of no friends around me that are using, as well as drinking herbs and a lot of nutrients. They make the mind stronger. No sugar at all except for fruit or an occasional short black coffee. And smoking pot has helped tremendously, as well as exercising, which has helped my sleep. Socializing and laughing my head off is also great. I went to a nightclub and laughed so much that I got kicked out. I honestly couldn't believe it. I have steam baths at the gym to help sweat out the methadone. And to help with sleep I took kava kava, passion flower and valerian. On top of this I was also taking Metagenics Fiberplex Plus, as well as vitamin B complex and other nutrients. It cannot be properly stated just how much good food is to a huge recovery, and a lot of water. I also gave up many years of smoking tobacco. I do still feel like a cigarette now and then, however the urge goes within a minute or two of disappearing. I still find it hard to concentrate and I do get impatient. Normally, I'm a very patient and tolerant man. Alien Abduction, a DMT trip report by Lemoyne, posted to earwid.org October 13th, 2018. I hope that anyone that is going to experience DMT does as much research as possible. I thought in the beginning that people's accounts were exaggerated, but every single bit of this is true. I'm talking about from a light DMT buzz to an intense DMT hyperspace, and even the possibility of being transported to another realm of existence that is beyond hyperspace, and all of your most wildest dreams put together. When I first started doing DMT, it was a beautiful substance that gave me a great feeling as well as great visuals. During my first trips, I never really broke through hyperspace. I just got the light DMT buzz, which was similar to a peak of an LSD trip, though it only lasted a short while. It wasn't really until about my 4th or 5th experience of DMT I got something like hyperspace. It's where everything was just spiraling out of control, and I had the feeling that I was in some sort of different dimension entirely. I thought it was the most amazing thing in the world, and I kept going there, getting the most out of my DMT extraction. However, something was fairly odd as I progressed through new and different trips with the substance. Something else was happening. The trips were progressively getting stronger, more unique, different flavour. It wasn't until about a few days ago when I had my first trip that was different than all of the others, when I could actually see my friend morph into a reptilian. The smoke of the DMT would start to just go through me like clean air, like it was nothing at all. I could start to feel a presence of something above me, like something was trying to talk to me or connect to me. I wasn't going to hyperspace anymore when I smoked this stuff. I was talking to supernatural or extraterrestrial life forms. It wasn't until my last trip, which I'm about to tell you about, when I knew that DMT was more than just a drug, more than just a chemical. The last thoughts of my confused little mind I would like to share with you before I explain my horrific DMT trip is that I may be developing a small mental case of schizophrenia from smoking it. Schizophrenia, or I'm actually starting to see reality in a completely different perspective, and starting to truly believe that DMT is connected with aliens in a different dimension. But to be honest, I don't know what is really going on. I really don't. But just in case the aliens do come and take me away forever, I should share my very hard to believe yet true story of my experiences with DMT. I've done LSD many times, been in the K-hole before, ventured to different worlds with various types of powerful psychedelics, and I've enjoyed most of my experiences with these substances, though, of course, had my fair share of bad ones as well. However, throughout all of my trips, I've never seen or felt anything like what DMT has done or shown me. Things have never seemed so real before. I really believe that DMT is more than just a psychedelic substance, but a key to communicating with super intelligent life forms. After the reptilian trip, I was so amazed on how crazy DMT actually was. This was around my 9th or 10th time using it, and it was by far the most intense. It wasn't until the night after when I did DMT again, and this time I was alone. I was in my room trying to fall asleep. I simply couldn't. I just couldn't stop thinking about how strange of a trip I'd experienced a few days before. I decided to play around on the internet, watch some TV, try to get the DMT off my mind the best I could. But I couldn't. It was like it was calling to me, wanting me to smoke it again. I don't really know how to explain it. Well, it was around 3 in the morning whenever I grabbed my bag and took out the DMT. I loaded a good bit of it into my oil burner, probably around 40 or 50 milligrams of the stuff. I entered my bathroom, which was quite small, but enough room for decent mobility, even though I probably wasn't going to need much of that at all. I set up the chair for me to sit on while I smoked the DMT. I was expecting a decent hyperspace from this experience, but lo and behold, instead, I got an alien abduction. Probably got about 3 really good hits in, but as soon as I set that pipe down, I was transported elsewhere. Things didn't just kind of change, kind of look different. Nah, I was transported. I wasn't in a hyperspace really, where colours were moving everywhere and forming objects. Nah, it was nothing like that. I was in some sort of spaceship compartment. A room in a spaceship. It was so real. It had to have been real. There was an electronic automatic futuristic sliding space door to the left of me, like how you see on spaceships in the movies. The walls were white, really white, exactly like the inside of a spaceship, and there was these small circle windows where I could see space and the stars outside. I was in a spaceship, travelling through space and time, and I couldn't really move. I was so shocked and so afraid. It was by far the most intense thing I've ever experienced. I could hear a bunch of aliens or something above me, talking to each other in some form of alien language. It was almost like they were observing me. You have no idea how real this felt, how afraid I was, yet utterly fascinated at the same time. I was travelling through space with these aliens for much longer than 10 minutes, I can promise you that. It was no regular DMT 5-minute hyperspace trip. This was real. It had to have been almost 15 to 20 minutes before I could actually start to move. The aliens were gone by now, or so I thought. But the area around me was still a spaceship compartment. It hadn't changed one bit. Then, I looked down at myself, my legs and arms, and they were twisting and turning, like my bones were changing into a monkey. The hair on my arms was getting thicker, and I was being transformed by the aliens themselves. I stood up and looked away from myself. I grabbed my head and closed my eyes. I simply could not believe that this was actually happening. Finally, after about 30 minutes, I was back in my bathroom, back to my world. However, the trip was not over. The aliens may have brought me back to my room, but I was still tripping hard. Everything was swirling into each other. And when I looked at myself in the mirror, my head was floating in the air, leaving my body in place. My entire stomach looked like a big swirl, and I honestly didn't know what to think. The entire trip had to have lasted for at least an hour and a half. It was so very, very strange. I had this huge mind expansion after the alien encounters. It was when I was walking around my room. It felt like LSD times a million. I thought I knew all the answers to the world, and that the aliens had taught me so much. I had actually had alien contact, and it was the craziest thing that's ever happened to me in my entire life. Finally, at about 6 in the morning, I was able to lay down. I went to sleep and woke up today with so much on my mind. Are aliens trying to communicate with me through DMT? Are aliens even real? Was I in a different dimension? So many thoughts were racing through my mind. I honestly don't know what to think about this whatsoever. Throughout the entire day, everything just seemed weird. I'd hear these noises above me or behind me, and look over my back to see nothing there. I don't know if I'm going crazy or what, but I do know that DMT is more than just a drug. There is a mystical meaning to it. Tonight, I may go for it again. Attempt to communicate with these aliens. I must. I might not make it back, but it's okay. Because either way, there is so much to learn from this. From insanity to super enhanced intelligence, I bless you all. I died and went to heaven. A 5-gram mushroom trip report sent in by a subscriber. I'd like to begin this trip report by giving some context. This trip happened over the past summer with a really good friend of mine who I'd tripped with countless times. At this point, I was already extremely experienced with shrooms and had taken them about 25 times previously. While most of my trips were very pleasant, this was one of my first bad trips, and boy, did it teach me a lesson. I'm an 18-year-old girl, 5'7" and pretty underweight. My friend is the same age as me, but overweight. Keep this in mind for later, as this information comes back into play. While yes, I am underweight, at this point in time my tolerance for shrooms and pretty much any other drug under the sun was ridiculously high. I'd gotten to the point where a 3-gram shroom dose is pretty much the baseline for me. On this particular day, my friend was getting ready to move out of state, so we decided to have one last sleepover together before she had to leave the next day. I got dropped off at my friend's apartment by my mum, and we decided to hang out off like any other by getting a bit drunk. I drank about the equivalent of 3 shots, mixed with some cranberry juice. I didn't think much about us drinking, as it was pretty commonplace for me and this friend. But then my friend said that she wanted to trip with me one last time before moving. I obliged and messaged my plug asking for a 7-gram bag of penis envy shrooms, and let him know that it was my last trip with my friend before she had to move away. My plug is a very nice guy, mind you. I secured the bag of shrooms and then went back to her apartment to inspect them. It looked like a lot more than 7 grams, and I was pretty sure that he may have thrown in extra since I'd mentioned it was my last trip with this friend of mine. Not to mention the actual mushrooms themselves were ginormous, with thick long stems and tiny caps. I knew I was in for a wild ride, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to take place. I had my mum take us back to my place to spend the night, because my room is extremely trippy and it's the perfect setting. As soon as we got to my room, I busted out the baggie and began to portion out our respective doses with a scale from my kitchen. As it turned out, my plug had given us closer to 10 grams instead of 7. The highest dose I had taken before this night was 4 Gs, and I was about to take 5. My friend and I downed them with a bit of water and waited for them to hit. We started talking for a while until suddenly I could feel the come up creeping up on me. It felt very warm and pleasant and giggly at first, but things started to intensify rather quickly. The visuals hit very soon after, and they were unlike any other shroom trip I'd ever had. It started off with everything violently waving, shifting and swaying. I turned to my friend and told her, "I think this is the highest I've ever been in my entire life." She laughed and thought I was being funny, but little did I know that things would get even crazier later on. About an hour passed of us talking about what we were experiencing, and things started flying off the rails. I glanced at my mirror, and it was like I could outwardly see the movement of my blood pumping throughout my body under my skin. The objects around me were plastered with vividly colourful, ever-changing patterns of mandalas and fractals. When I looked out my window, it looked as though a raging storm was aggressively pushing and pulling the trees in my vicinity. I kept asking my friend if it was storming outside, to which she repeatedly told me that it wasn't. By now, I hadn't peaked yet, but to try and distract myself from the chaos occurring around me, I pulled up some images of neat things on the internet to trip out on. I searched up an image of the earth, and it was overlaid with the same patterns of the fractals and mandalas that covered me in my room. The clouds in the image were swirling and moving as if I was seeing live footage of our planet from afar. Similarly, when I looked at a picture of a galaxy, it was spinning and swirling as if I was seeing it in person with my own 2 eyes. I looked up from my phone, and the peak began to hit me. And damn, was it hitting me hard. My cat was in the room with us at this point, and he seemed to be freaking out while watching us. I can't blame him, because we probably looked and sounded insane. He walked up to me, and after petting him, he sat about a foot away from me and started grooming himself. As I watched him lick his paws, it appeared as though time began to loop in on itself. He'd lick his paw, and then almost as if I was watching an instant replay, the same action would rewind, play out again, rewind, and so on and so forth about 5 or 6 times. The movements of my friend and my cat started glitching out, repeating swiftly and aggressively over and over. My cat went to a corner of my room further away from me, laid out on his side, flat against the floor. One of my worst fears is of my cat passing away, as he's quite old, and also my childhood cat, which I love very dearly. So I walked over to him, crouched down, tried nudging him to get up, and his body seemed limp and motionless. My heart sank to my stomach, and the searing hot sensation of fear coursed through me. Did he die? I thought to myself, in a state of violent panic. With this thought came a feeling that I can only describe as losing a part of myself. I was overcome with grief and fear. I nudged him more aggressively, and to my utter relief, he got up. I let him out of my room so I wouldn't focus and worry so much about him. But it was after that point that the trip was far beyond saving, or becoming pleasant once again whatsoever. True peak began to hit me. It was the most bizarre, otherworldly experience that I have ever encountered. It was as if I had gone blind. All I could see were the patterns of shifting and changing fractals and mandalas filling the entirety of my vision. I couldn't move, speak, hear, think, or feel anything. I was completely convinced that I'd passed away and was glimpsing the afterlife. The patterns started organizing themselves into an overwhelming, terrifying, but simultaneously awe-inspiring formation. There was a large eye at the center, surrounded by rings and rows of smaller eyes, shifting around the middle. In the background was orange and brown, earthy-coloured formations of changing shapes. At first, all I could hear were the sounds of what seemed like billions of people, dead and living, calling out, crying, laughing, speaking and screaming in every language all at once. It was as if I was hearing every sound that was being made or has ever been made before on the planet. The noises slowly shifted into the sound of thousands of heavenly singing voices, like a choir of infinite proportion. They hummed and chimed in unison, and it was the most beautiful but overwhelming sound to have ever graced my senses. I had no knowledge of who I was, who I love, my family, my name, my friends, or any knowledge of my human life thus far. It was as though I didn't exist anymore. Fully convinced that I was witnessing God himself, I asked him, without speaking, "Where do we go when we die?" And all of a sudden, the choir in perfect unison responded, "The infinite collective." It was by now that my peak was slowly passing, and I began to return to my body. I came to in my friend's arms, covered in a pool of my own sweat, still lacking the sensation of touch. I asked my friend what had happened, and she said that I started to zone out and stare off into space, and then seemingly fainting with my eyes open. I was still tripping super hard at this point, but I was conscious. I proceeded to forget how to breathe, and slipped in and out of reality for a while afterwards. I felt like I was burning from the inside, and everything was swelteringly hot. I slowly tried to recall who I was, examining every facet of my being with immense detail. I fought to remember my name, where I was born, my family members, my friends, what I enjoy, what I dislike, etc., until my ego slowly returned back to me again. My friend had to keep reminding me to breathe because I kept forgetting to do so. I started to chug water to flush the trip out of my system. I was asking my friend for my mum, as well as my older brother or any of my family members at all, so that I could tell them how much I love them or have them comfort me in some way. I called my best friend in a panic, asking her to come over and telling her that I'd taken shrooms and seemingly had a panic attack of some sort. She comforted me, and then I hung up. I finally began to come down. I sat to ask my friend how her trip was going. She told me she was tripping absolute balls, and if she was tripping balls at 2 times my weight, then you can only imagine what I had been going through. I head to the kitchen to get some water. I tell my little brother, who knows that I do drugs and is chill about it, to come and hang out with me, and that I was having a really bad shroom trip. I waited out the rest of my trip with my friend and my little brother, whilst we watched my favourite YouTube videos so I could calm down. In conclusion, this is definitely the craziest experience I've ever had on any psychedelic or substance that I've tried. The next day, I had a huge appreciation for life itself, and learnt to cherish that which I love to the fullest, as life is but a fleeting moment, and nothing lasts forever. I ended up writing several poems about this experience, and tried to the best of my ability to draw what I had seen the night prior. I'm pretty sure that I still would have tripped ridiculously hard on this dose regardless, but I think that drinking several hours beforehand definitely contributed to just how insane things got. If there's one thing you can take away from this, it's to never disrespect or underestimate the power that shrooms truly hold. The benefit has been profound. A ketamine and nitrous oxide trip report by Zulu, posted to earwid.org February 25th, 2017. I hope my experience here can shed light on what is happening with the synergy of these two substances. I'll try to be brief and only provide what I believe is relevant information, although it is tied in with a story of alcoholism. I'm a 32-year-old successful business owner with numerous college degrees. I've also been an alcoholic over half my life. I've made numerous attempts to quit drinking over the past 16 years to no long-term avail. That was until this past year. Psychedelics have played an instrumental role in unlocking my psychotic patterns of perpetual self-destruction through alcohol. The first 3 months of alcohol abstinence are a living hell. It is the most physically, psychologically, and spiritually challenging and exhausting marathon ever. I felt like a tiny lost sailboat in a Category 5 hurricane. I am now happier and healthier now than I've ever been in my entire life. I took kratom and smoked cigarettes often during the day, and occasional nitrous oxide at night, to relieve the tension and ease the cravings of withdrawal. After 4 months of this, my body had detoxed more than ever in 16 years. I started to come alive again. I'd been sober for 10 months, and off kratom for at least 3. I was still smoking cigarettes and vaping regularly, like many alcoholics in recovery. I should note that I'd been seeing an addiction therapist, as well as being on the paleo diet. So my body was very clean, almost exclusively home-cooked meals with organic whole foods and almost zero sugar consumption. To this day though, I do enjoy having a few hits of nitrous after work from time to time. A good friend of mine had some pharmaceutical-grade ketamine and asked if I wanted to try it. I'd only ever heard anecdotal reports about it prior. He is a very intelligent and trustworthy person who I respect highly. He informed me that ketamine has virtually zero temporary or long-term negative side effects, and is not physiologically addicting. So just as a side note, this is me talking, not the report, but this isn't actually true. There are a lot of long-term negative side effects from abusing ket, and while it's not physiologically addicting in general, lots of people have reported that there are physiological side effects from abusing it. However, In the case of this person just using it the once, obviously, there aren't going to be from just a single usage, but it is very possible to become psychologically addicted to ketamine, as yours truly had become for a very long time, and it did have a lot of long-term and short-term negative side effects that obviously can be combated by abstaining from usage, just getting your life back on track in terms of your diet, and just general mental clarity. The worst thing for me for long-term ketamine use has been the adverse effects it's had on my concentration, my attention span, and just general effects to do with my perception of reality that is distorted, put me in a dissociative bubble for a long time. But it must be said that this was due to high levels of abuse over the course of a year. So yeah, just bear that in mind, that it's not actually true that there is zero negative side effects. Even just with one single use, people can experience some form of bladder discomfort. So that's just a very, very short-term side effect that won't last the entire experience and will clear up after a few days. But obviously, if you're abusing this for a long time, you are going to seriously damage your bladder. And it's also been purported from people that there could be some form of brain damage if you're using it for a very long time. So yeah, just bear in mind that whilst these substances can induce very positive healing experiences, like in this report, it must be said that their safety profile is not on the level of psychedelics like mushrooms and LSD, and there is much more of a higher potential for addiction. But yeah, we'll get back into it. I'd also heard some psychiatrists as prescribing ketamine for patients with depression, having somewhat successful results. So I decided I'd go and try it with him. The onset. At 9 PM on a Wednesday evening, my friend and I insufflated approximately 100 milligrams of powdered ketamine in the comfort of my own home. I had no defined intentions nor expectations, besides the curiosity of what bodily or psychosomatic effects would take place. The set and setting was both relaxed and optimistic, as well as safe and honest. I had no idea the experience to come would positively affect me for days and months afterwards. Immediately after snorting, there was a distinct nasal burn, but not unbearable. This subsided after 10 to 15 minutes. After 5 to 10 minutes, I felt heavy and slightly off balance. I also felt a little bit disoriented and almost drunk, but without the euphoria. I'll admit, the ketamine alone is not all that enjoyable. Bright lights are overpowering, and I got a bit of anxiety. My friend and I chatted for 30 more minutes or so. I felt a bit awkward and uncomfortable, and decided that ketamine wasn't for me, and I just wanted it to be over. So I excused myself to retire for the rest of the night. As I often do right before bed to relieve tension or slip into a more relaxed state, I decided to do a few hits of nitrous. I was alone in bed in almost complete darkness and silence when I took 2 full canister hits of nitrous from my whippet dispenser. What was about to take place was by far the most psychedelic and transcendent experience I've ever had in my entire life. I'll note, as well, that I have used numerous psychedelics at varying dosages over the past 14 years, including mushrooms, LSD, mescaline, MDMA, DMT, salvia, and various others. The experience, or trip. Immediately, I fell to the centre of a beautifully coloured Victorian-era ballroom with ornate details and high ceilings. It was silent inside. Not scary, but definitely foreign. There, however, was a playful sense of humour and light-heartedness about the room. All of a sudden, I began transforming into a 4-sided pyramid made out of colourful ground beef or meat. My chest, back, and left arm unfolded into 3 meat staircases before I knew it, and I looked over to my right arm, transforming from what I normally would recognise as my right arm into an incredible meat staircase. It was beyond just visual. I could feel my body transforming quite intensely, although not painfully. As my right arm was almost completely transformed, I got an intense rush of fear. I was no longer myself. I was now a colourful, meaty pyramid staircase inside of this decadent ballroom, and I had come to terms with it real quick. I remember saying aloud to myself as my new reality took form, This isn't fair. Then, I came to in my bed with a heart attack of amazement. The undeniable authenticity and palpable realness of what had just happened was clearly as real as shooting hoops with a friend, swimming in the ocean, having dinner, making love, or getting into a car accident. It was very real. Absolutely flabbergasted and laying there in bed, I was fully apprehensive to do any more. But I knew I had just stumbled upon a goldmine, a new and unique opportunity to dive into uncharted psychedelic waters. So, I loaded up 2 more nitrous canisters. I inhaled them both swiftly, and within seconds, a primitive drawing of a single face appeared in front of me. The face was smooth orange and red like a nice sunset. It had an intense presence. I opened my eyes, and I was still in my bedroom, but the face was still in front of me. It then began multiplying rapidly, filling over the walls and ceiling. I looked at my body, and it too began transforming into thousands of replicas of this face. Then, that's all there was. Infinite faces everywhere. I was mortally terrified, pulsating with fear. Again, I began to change forms, and was losing my identity forever, so it seemed. The fear was overwhelming, but then I had to let go, and accept that I was now a massive array of fractal faces travelling at light speed. I thought I had died, and that this was my transcendent welcoming. Immediately though, I transported back into my bed with an even greater appreciation for the visceral nature of what had just happened. I could not believe I or any other human was capable of experiencing such intense hallucinations and reality changes. With my eyes wide open, I laughed aloud in complete shock. It was simply unbelievable, and I was deathly afraid to continue. But I did feel it was somehow pertinent to explore the catacombs of my own mind. After all, I may never do this again, and I did want to commit to this wild journey. I had to remind myself that I'm safe in my bed, and that these Salvador Dali-like realities I'm entering are just temporary and impermanent, no matter how intense they may feel. I then did 10 to 15 more nitrous canisters, all with equally bizarre and perplexing hallucinations, but none quite as intense and symbolic as the 2 previously described. Another of these hallucinations included a gnome standing on my desk, spinning a meat grinder, which was sucking in all the material possessions in my room, turning them to dust. In another, my body was growing snakes out of it, and dancing with beautiful black snake women. The one where I really had to draw the line was where a fireball ripped out of my cheek, flew through my window, and crashed into my garage, setting it ablaze. That one felt too real. In fact, I feared I may cross the 2 realities and hurt myself or somebody else if I could shoot fireballs out of my mouth into my garage. So, I decided to stop. Post-experience and effects. That night, I slept like a baby, and I woke up refreshed and ready for work on time as usual. In fact, I had a new glow that I'd never felt before. Typically, I'm very rushed and high-strung all day working with numerous clients, all on time-sensitive schedules. The stress is high, and I'm always rushing. That morning, and for the next week, I felt an overwhelming sense of calm and relaxation, and my tension and anxiety had almost completely diminished. Things I'd normally fret over, like slow drivers in the morning or people wasting my time at work, etc., these had no power to drain my energy as they normally do. In fact, I saw how irrelevant and wasteful those thought patterns were to my energy. I very much enjoyed every moment of the next week at work and home. And amazingly, I had 0 cravings for nicotine and have not smoked since. I consumed ketamine by itself 1 month later at 100 milligrams. I did not hallucinate, as no nitrous was mixed. I did, however, though, feel the same emotional and psychological effects of relaxation, anxiety suppression, and a sense of calm throughout my day for the next week. After a week, the intensity of the calmness began to wear off, and the stress of normal life crept back in. I consumed about 30 milligrams of K just a few days ago, a very small amount, which I felt almost zero effects of sedation from. I laid down in bed with the lights off and took 2 canisters of nitrous. Even at such a low dose of ketamine, I was able to visit similar dimensions of obscurity. The hallucinations were incredible again, but not quite as intense or ego-threatening as last time. I had trouble recollecting them as well. The next week or so, I did not feel the same intense relaxation and calm as the previous 2 times using ketamine. I'd surmised that the K is having lasting effects throughout my neurological pathways, long after the 1-hour high that it seems to last for. My therapist said it pretty clearly that it's a tranquilizer, and it seems to be making you more tranquil. From what I have gathered from the psychedelic community over the past 10 years, is that psychedelics can often induce mystical experiences in us, shattering our frail concepts of culturally constructed reality and personal identity. These realities we construct are far too often self-limiting or self-deprecating. Psychedelic experiences can cut to the core of our being, helping us see the beauty of our world and the temporal nature of our precious life, often freeing us from the grips of the past. With the combination of ketamine and nitrous, I can see 2 major benefits. The ketamine alone, no doubt, has stress-reducing effects for days after. The wild hallucinations from the combination of ketamine and nitrous allowed me to see my culturally constructed identity, watch it massively transform out of my control, and finally let it go. I believe this is, or is similar to ego death. Another major benefit to ketamine and nitrous is that it is short in duration and almost completely benign on the body. Other psychedelics can last a very long time and are difficult to navigate with negative emotions. I feel as though hallucinating in a safe environment and with short duration, even at great intensity, can be a positive stressor. For example, giving a speech is a positive stressor. There is lots of anxiety, expectation, and planning going into a speech. But once successfully delivered, it feels incredibly rewarding. The stress of a successfully completed trip, coupled with positive mood tranquilizing effects which linger for up to a week, I believe are tremendously positive. For a recovering alcoholic with a high-stress life, seemingly on the verge of relapse every day, the benefit of this relatively gentle yet effective combination of substances has been utterly profound. My Non-Dual Experience, a trip report by Curator, posted to the 5-MeO-DMT forums, May 28, 2019. 5-MeO-DMT helped me have the most sublime human experience I've encountered up to this moment. This is not an endorsement or suggestion to do it though. The following is only my experience. More than a year, my journey through life has been in a pursuit to realize healing from a tragedy no parent should have to endure. My desire was to experience the sacred in such a way that would restore my faith in life and inspire me to keep living it happily. When I started, a little over a year ago, I didn't know smoking the crystallized venom of an animal was even a thing, let alone might produce a difference in point of view that would forever change the way I think and feel about and navigate in life. That said, it was such a short experience, a very big one, but lasting only 10 minutes. Add another 10 minutes for gently reintegrating into my body, and enjoying the sensation makes it about 20 minutes total. I did exactly as my guide told me to do. He explained for some time what I might expect during the experience, how I might help if things got too intense, and even how to draw the smoke from the water pipe, given his years of personal experience and of tending others. He told me to do nothing if I encountered anything, to just let it happen and be as still and relaxed and open as I can. As I inhaled all I could hold of the smoke from the pipe, I released the pipe into his hands and deliberately lay my head back on the pillow at the end of the mat. As soon as I did this, a massive sensation of the deepest relaxation I've ever felt came over me. My body exhaled and sighed, as it was too much effort to hold the breath in any longer. The sense of me or I began to fall away. A humming sound or sensation, not loud or soft, was present, and there was an awareness of geometric shapes and lines whisking past the mind's eye, as if being sucked into a tunnel and picking up speed. There may have been a slight sense of fear, but from that moment in memory, there was only becoming aware of being in a place of absolutely pure, brilliant white. I can't say it was light, but I will call it that, since there seemed to be no origin or point of beginning or direction or end. It was all around, and the point of reference was from something like within. There was nothing. No feelings, no thoughts, no sound, anything. Yet, there was a sense of perfect contentment. I must have been on my way back, since I started to notice my hands and arms. I lifted them up and saw nothing more than silhouettes, and now my eyes are feeling like they are wide open. As I look at this white, I suddenly inhale as if seeing the most magnificent thing I have ever gazed upon. In my periphery, my hands looked abnormal, like they had fewer fingers and they were longer. I made no effort to look closer, but continued to gaze at the center. The sensation seemed like awe. You could say I gasped, but softer and slower, with wonder and surprise. The kind of wonder a child would have opening a present never imagined receiving, but being so grateful upon opening it you could see that this was an experience of a new sense of joy, deeper than anything the child had ever felt before. Gratitude and joy were all that existed now. As I perceived my hands, which didn't feel like my hands at all, but I felt a part of them surrounded an orb of light that was hardly distinguishable by an almost imperceptible line defining the orb. It was like balancing the orb in the middle of the hands. As I moved them, like a movement in Tai Chi, I inhaled in wonder again, as if I just became aware that this was the universe or Earth itself. It is all light, and is being loved on and held in the space of love, since it is love itself, beyond understanding. This is what causes this phenomenon to occur and be sustained. That was my sense of understanding. Nothing mattered, yet it is all loved, beyond understanding, which makes it all possible and acceptable. I was in this state of bliss for the remainder of my time. I felt nothing but infinite joy and gratitude, and then love itself moved through me, causing my body to weep gently as I continued to stay with this light as long as I could. The moment I noticed being hooked by any emotion or thought, I would simply and gently bring my awareness back to the light again, and would feel or notice the blissful state. I was calm and happy. I began to become aware of my guide, and feeling so moved, I reached for his hand in a gesture of thanks. I gently squeezed his hand, belly giggled, held it long enough for him to know that all was well, and released it, placing my arm back on the floor with my palms up. He'd been quietly at my side the entire time, a perfect shepherd. I felt a deep and profound sense of love and appreciation for him. Shortly after this, I sensed him move on to the kitchen. He knew I was safe and started to prepare our meal. I was experiencing the greatest sense of ecstasy my body could tolerate, and wept gently, all the while keeping my focus in on the white. My thoughts were few, and I found myself just noticing and appreciating. My breath was relaxed and deep, and I felt a bliss beyond anything I've ever experienced prior. There were no entities present, there was no thought, and as for emotional states, what I think I was experiencing was the awareness of these, but not getting attached to anything in particular. This was glory. This was beauty. And the essence I sensed was that this is life, and it is on purpose, and that is all it needs to be. It was the simplest of ideas, that life itself is the only purpose. I thought that this must be heaven, and wished it could last, but I knew I was re-entering the normal state of being, and gently touched my face with my fingers. They were cool, and when I did, I had the sense that I was alive, and I felt a new sense of gratitude for my own life. It was invigorating, and I felt more alive than ever. Again, gratitude. Again, joy. A belly laughed from deep within. As I write this, it makes me smile and chuckle. I'm happy to believe that what I experienced might be what it's like after this body breathes no more. I think I got what I wanted from this, and then some. I gave a big smile and a chuckle. This was the most beautiful experience I've ever had so far in this body. But I must leave a disclaimer. 5-MeO-DMT is not for everyone, and my experience may not be typical. This is not like my mushroom or ayahuasca experiences whatsoever. I've not been able to reach a point of separation from the ego in those experiences. They come on slower, and for me, there's always been a point of reference from my ego going deeper, and then a resistance. In this experience though, the opposite seemed true. When I fully inhaled, there was no turning back in any way. Once I felt it come on, there was no time for bargaining. I was already gone. I guess you could liken it to hiking up a mountain and summiting after the climb, ingesting ayahuasca or mushrooms. But this was like being flown to the summit blindfolded first, and then becoming aware when at the summit. Then after, it was a matter of riding the descent smoothly. That's kind of what it was like for me anyway. I also think what added to my experience was that as a result of 22 years of practicing letting go of my ego, as well as meditation practices, emotional cathartic work, ordeal processes, sensory deprivation, some decent awareness of Eastern thought and belief and practice, and more than a few psychedelic experiences which have been intentional. That stated though, I might have just been lucky. But, maybe most important was my guide. I cannot say enough about his expertise and love really, and thoughtfulness. I think he would do it for free if he didn't have any expenses, and now I know why. My God. If I'd only known earlier in my life this kind of experience were possible. I am positive that his long personal experience with this substance and his experience guiding others is the other main reason I had this type of experience. From vetting appropriate clients, this method is not for everyone, to preparation as to set and setting, an amount to use and delivery system, which all help make this experience possible. If you do decide this is for you, please invest the time in researching about it, and please find yourself a guide. Not all entities are friendly. A DMT trip report by Hypersphere, posted to Earwid.org, June 21st, 2021. Background. I am male, and at the time of the experience, I was 23 years old, weighed 125 pounds, and was in good mental and physical health. I take no prescriptions or over-the-counter medications, but use marijuana and yerba mate on a daily basis. I've taken a variety of substances, but my major interest lies with the psychedelics. This was by no means my first experience of DMT, I had been frequently experimenting with this substance on its own or in combination with other substances, and had gained a high level of comfortability, enjoyment, and awe of the experiences that were possible with this substance. Set and setting. My room, alone at night time. I'd taken a small amount of MDMA earlier in the evening, and was in a mood to continue exploring altered states of consciousness. I felt the desire to smoke some DMT, and did so with my usual setup ritual. Dim lighting, comfortably seated against a wall with a pillow at my back, and some calm, chill music lined up to anchor my consciousness during re-entry. The experience. As I rolled the stem of the pipe back and forth, heating, scrounging the remnants of DMT stuck to the sides of the glass vessel, I said, holding the flame and spinning the pipe, I asked to connect to my higher self. Show me something different. Show me something I haven't seen before. And then I breathed in. Once, hold, exhale. Once more feels natural. In, hold, just a little vapor coming up the tube. There was a dull humming sound, like that of an old and cranky vacuum cleaner. The kind of dull, grating mechanical noise that makes your head hurt. Every summer afternoon was ruined by lawnmowers and weed whippers. Every dog terrified of the menacing, vibrating, ear-busting vacuum cleaner. This terrible, painful pressure in my skull seemed to be forcing my head downwards. I went with it, remembering how I'd been directed into certain body positions before on DMT to good effect. I was directed into a position of abasement, seeking to escape the pain. With the fanfare of trumpets, a tear opened up in the fabric of space and time. Something whispered to me that I was being brought into the presence of someone worthy of great respect, and that I was privileged for it. Through this hole made his entrance, a kind of gloating, gluttonous male entity. It was this thing that was making that terrible humming noise. For a moment, His Majesty spoke to me, though I could not understand any of the words. It reminded me of Star Wars: A New Hope. Alright, yeah, I went through a Star Wars geek phase. When all the droids are in the big sand transport and moving around, squeaking and twittering and gloff-gloffing at one another. This threw me off about as much as it would throw you off if your computer started trying to communicate to you, based upon its own personal language derived from its binary encoding. Or maybe your computer would start suddenly speaking fluid Japanese. Surely, the language of machines, I guess. It was then that I was back to being simply gloated over malevolently. The audience and hearing was closing. That vicious pain came back, inescapable this time. Something was all wrong about this. And I said, no, I will not be your servant. I will not be your servant at all. I cried. Leave this space now. The pain in my head was maddening as this invisible entity latched himself onto my skull, over the crown chakra, and pressing in at the hollow at the base of the skull. I found my perceptions being poked and prodded, seeking to maximize the painful and fearful effects. I did not let my shifting perceptions affect my centered and collected core though. I sealed off my mind, a little protected kernel at the center of all the painful, fearful sensations that I was experiencing. I rode out the duration of the tryptamine flash. You cannot break my mind. I'm too powerful. I can withstand whatever you throw at me. Your mind games do not trick me at all. Again, I cried out, I will not be a servant. The pain in my head stepped up another notch. This is sacred space and you cannot be here. This house is protected. You cannot be here. I pictured the diamond-shaped protection rune encircling the entire house, and with finality and strength in my voice, leave this space, now. The grip in my skull loosened and I shrugged him off. We remained hovering in the ether. I did a burning of Russian sage to clear the area, and at first my movements were shaky and hasty. I took the time to be calm and collected again, and then proceeded smoothly with the smudging. The dull pain was still there, tingling. This was one relentless little fucker. If you try to stay, I warned him, you have not just me to face. I was thinking of the two of my roommates particularly, male and female, and powerful. You will not be tolerated in this space. We will throw you out, so leave now and never come back. Still spitting venom, the treaty was made. I opened the window wide to allow his passage, and watched as something I couldn't see, except as maybe a slippery, oily sheen to the air, slowly pulled up its foul tentacles, its trailing eyeballs and cytoplasmic brain netting devices, and dragged its sorry ass out of my house. That's right, bitch. Hopefully it didn't slip across the street to terrorize someone else's sleep. Shit's getting serious now, boys and girls. If I wasn't so sane, I'd think I was going mad. So be careful what you wish for. Something different. Something I hadn't seen before. Instant manifestation. I talked about this experience with one of my roommates the next day. He explained to me that any entity that shows up during a DMT experience is an entity that I have called in. They can try any trick in the book, manipulating my perceptions and emotions, trying to get me to give them power over myself. But ultimately, they have no power of their own over us, except that which we give them. Any entity that I call in must conform to my will, if asked enough times and with enough strength. This is a very good thing to know when entering DMT space. When interacting with entities on the energetic plane, there is no way for them to hide their intentions towards us. When interacting with entities on the energetic plane, there is no way for them to hide their intentions towards us. My intuition on this one went off. There was something ill-intentioned and malevolent about this entity. It is wise to trust your intuitions in cases like this. Beware the psychic vacuum cleaner. Not all entities in DMT space are friendly. I learnt a lot from this experience. It reminded me of the importance of stating my intentions very clearly and consciously before going into an experience. A conscious statement of intent serves to focus the experience, and I can rest assured that whatever I experience in the trip will be within my intent. After all this, I started specifically inviting only those entities who are friendly, helpful, benevolent, and of positive intention for the good of all beings. Thank you all for reading. The following is an Amanita Muscaria trip report, sent in by a subscriber. Hi, I'm Thomas from France, and I really appreciate your channel. It's helped me a lot, and since I don't have any friends around me experimenting with plant or mush medicine, I have no one to talk to or hear from regarding this, so thank you. Here is my report from Tuesday the 24th of October, 2023. Last Tuesday, I came back to my house in a small village after a long weekend in the city. I knew I forgot a jar outside before leaving. In it were a few Amanita caps, fresh in cold water. It was a leftover from a harvest that took ages to dry in multiple oven sessions. I didn't want to throw them away, so I decided to try a sun tea, because apparently UV would convert ibotenic acid into mucimol. I've been experimenting with amanitas since last year's harvest. They're abundant in the forest nearby. My goal was to trip, but I started experimenting with this really special mushroom in the safest way possible. And after 10 months, I'd finished 3 big jars of dried caps without ever feeling anything, not even a buzz. But nevertheless, I had good nights and vivid dreams. So back to last Tuesday. The jar was still there. It's been cold, so I decided to consume it. I wasn't trusting that the UV would have done a good job, so I decided to boil the thing and reduce the volume. I let it simmer for about 40 minutes. Once the brew was in my cup, I added lemon juice and honey. About halfway down, I started shivering every time I was swallowing. I told myself, "Oh, this is a good sign. It's going to work this time." I drank a bit more and I started to wonder if it would be a better idea to stop there, but I finished it anyway. Quickly, I felt an effect like being drunk. My stomach was empty for 6 hours, and at 8 PM, 45 minutes after I ingested the tea, I went upstairs to meditate in my bed, seated against the wall, and blacked out. Did I fall asleep? The next thing I remember is slowly coming back to consciousness, but not quite in my ego in this world. I could think, this is it, this is working this time. But I had no idea why I would think that. Brain palpitations, as I call it, were hitting hard. It was like blinking really quickly, but not quite the same. Then, a dissociating sensation submersed me. It reminded me of salvia divinorum, mixed with that feeling that you get during a K-hole, this kind presence, and the feeling that you're home. I started having a vision of a parabolic object covered with thousands of mirrors which were flipping upside down, one after the other, at every palpitation. This was super weird, and I still had no idea of what was really happening. Then, I had the strange feeling that I was getting close to the truth of all things, once every palpitations would merge into one. During that phase of increasing speed, my consciousness came back, and I remembered that I took Amanita, but wasn't quite sure where I was right now. I felt the mattress, and it reassured me, and I put trust in the process of what was unfolding. It's like something close to an orgasm, and I felt I would explode or something, or merge into another dimension entirely. I was grabbing my sheets and tightening my jaw. I wanted to make it, whatever it was. But suddenly, an urge to vomit came over me. I opened my eyes and saw the window lit up by the moon. I stood up, almost fell, and then purged twice outside. The garden itself seemed 30 meters down. The imbalance I was feeling was crazy. I could feel my body falling to the back left. I was off that brainstorm, and once I figured how to balance out, I wanted to go downstairs to the bathroom. The staircase is pretty steep, so I was really careful. But once I was at the bottom, I realised I couldn't feel my body moving, even during really fast movements. No muscle pain whatsoever. The time distortion was really something to behold. I could go full Flash Gordon mode, and it actually made me laugh. But I thought about what I just went through, and I decided to go back to my bed to meditate, curious on what I would feel next. I realised upon grabbing my phone that it was now 3 AM, and this was a shocking revelation. Did all the other tries of Amanita peak when I was asleep? And this one woke me up because I needed to puke, I wondered. I couldn't believe how messed up I was 7.5 hours in. I tried to unlock my phone without success, and during that, I started completely dissociating from my body. My awareness itself seemed to emanate from above my left shoulder. I couldn't feel my body whatsoever, but I could intervene at any time I wanted. It was quite pleasant being 50% out of my body and 50% in. I sat cross-legged with my back against the wall and started breathing deeply. Nothing noticeable in terms of vision. I was still half dissociated. But then, my arms started moving by themselves or by some kind of force that I could feel in my hands. I decided to trust it, and then, time slowed down a lot. I was amazed by this. My arms were moving up and down in slow motion, completely out of my control. Suddenly, it's like inviting me up to some kind of a dance. I let myself go without intervening, thinking I got to heal my neck and shoulder pain. I mean, why not? I was shaking and moving really fast as the flow of time suddenly came back to normal. I started chanting and hyperventilating. Again, I could have stopped it at any time, but I was really curious to experience it. I had no idea what I was saying. It was like a shaman trance and ended with banging my head against the mattress, still hyperventilating. Then, it all stopped on empty lungs. I held my breath and told myself, why is it making me do a Wim Hof? Or is it me? Or it? As I was just dissociated before, it could have been a spirit. Anyway, after a few breath holds, I felt really tired and could feel my body falling asleep, but my awareness itself was slowly drifting to the top right of my sight. I thought I was about to be conscious in the unconscious. The drift out was really slow, and it felt like a tutorial or something, but any time I swallowed my saliva, it was taking me right back into my body. I had multiple tries, and I could hear voices teaching me the whole time. Unfortunately, I fell asleep at some point. The dreams I had after this were crazy real and coloured, and utterly insane in what was happening in them. I'm not ready to put that into words right now. I woke up pretty alright, although a bit worried about those 6 to 7 hours of blackout, and I didn't tell you that I pissed my bed during this whole time. All in all, this was a very intense experience, and I do wish someone was around for it, but at the same time I sort of don't, because I would have alarmed anyone during the trance, dance and chanting stage. It's really important to brew tea from as many dried caps as you can, as the concentration of the compounds varies quite a lot. It really was a mistake for me to brew 7 fresh caps. I do not recommend this whatsoever. Be safe, out and in there. Totalito. This is not where I want to be right now. An alcohol, cannabis, and salvia divinorum trip report, posted by Foolish Freshman to earwid.org December 3rd, 2004. I'm writing this report to give a legitimate warning to anyone who might be interested in giving salvia divinorum, a 12x extract, which was what I was told after the experience, a legitimate whirl. Before I continue, I would like to let all who read this know that I'm not a foolish person regarding the use of psychedelics. I'm currently pursuing an anthropology degree, with emphasis on cultural religious practices, and I always exercise the utmost caution when practicing mind-altering substances of any kind. In the past, I've had experience of multiple different hallucinatory substances, amazing, and, of course, a small amount of dabbling in speedy powders, not quite my cup of tea. I'm writing about one particular Saturday night, when I was a freshman at my college. It was at this point I was somewhat naive in the realm of psychedelic conscious experience, and basically had no idea what salvia, the nightmare leaf, as many call it around here, had in store for me. After getting myself quite drunk at an off-campus kegger and a trip to the bar, I found myself in the company of a small group of psychonauts in a very cramped dorm room on the edge of campus. As the booze began to run dry, and the very last of our cannabis was in the process of being smoked, we realised that our night seemed to be at an end. "Not to fear," said a friend of mine. I'll call him Igby. "I have 1.5 grams of 12x salvia here. I reckon we should fire up the bong," he said. "What's salvia?" I naively asked, being unfamiliar with the drug at this point in time. "Oh, it's a psychoactive drug. It'll make you see some funky shit," Igby replied, very sketchy on the details. As the alcohol had loosened me up quite a bit, I felt that I might give it a whirl, being out of beer and cannabis. Well, This was my first mistake, folks. Salvia is not to be trifled with. I'd tripped on a healthy eighth of mushrooms prior to this several times, and I'd never experienced anything negative, so all systems were go. Next thing I know, the 4-foot glass bong was in front of me, as I was being blessed with the opportunity to spark it. Being drunk, I touched the hell out of the bong. I waited for the chamber to turn an opaque milky white, and cleared the entire thing. I started to gag on the smoke, as my lungs literally reached maximum capacity. Wow, I was certainly in for it now. Foolish bastard that I am. After exhaling, I noted a strange, not altogether pleasing, leafy taste. Not your dank cannabinoids, my friends. Not at all. Now, from this point on, let it be known that I have absolutely no concept of time, or any real perspective on the true chronology of these events, but I will articulate it as best I can. The first thing I remember noticing was a strange sort of rumbling feeling. This can be related to when I first feel a good hit of nitrous oxide coming on, the effect one would get as a roaring train rolls by a room, causing everything to tremble and shake. The next thing I realised, everything had become unreal, as if in a dream. I looked up at the wall and there was this strange sort of membrane-like structure that was looming over. Suddenly, it fell down upon me. It was almost as though I was being spun into a sort of cocoon-like thing, seemingly out of nothing. My first reaction was complete and utter disbelief. I'd completely forgotten that I had taken any substance whatsoever, and essentially, I didn't know what the hell was going on. I tried to make out my friends' faces for comfort, and I was utterly aghast to see the entire room, and everything that encompassed it, including my friends themselves, were growing in size, as if coming near me. Suddenly, the entire room, or reality, or whatever the hell it was, passed right through me, and off in the distance, I perceived another reality, the same one as before with my friends sitting in the room hitting the bong. This sort of Polaroid type thing grew and grew again, until it passed by me once more, only to be followed by the same thing over and over again, as if in some form of demented flashback cycle. It was by now that I was in a complete panic. I'd lost all control of my limbs, as the cocoon, I know it sounds fucked up, was being spun around my entire body, pinning me to the ground. For some reason, I made the assumption at this point that the police were there. I have no idea why I came to this thought. It's just bad tripping, or some form of it, I suppose. I thought they were going to take me away. I shouted out to my friends to help me, but what came out of my mouth was perceived by my ears as an unintelligible mess of broken up syllables. I'm not necessarily talking about auditory hallucinations and octave changes like an LSD or mushroom experience. It really was as if my voice was a track on a CD player that was skipping rapidly. So rapidly, in fact, that I could not understand what I or anyone else in the room was saying. Now, here's where things get really crazy. The room itself keeps passing by me faster and faster and faster, as the cycle or frame thing seems to be speeding up. I started to hear this strange, deep, ominous humming noise, as though we were about to jump to hyperspeed in a starship of some sort. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, everything broke apart. It was as though my mind could not handle what was going on in reality, and the cycle itself tore apart violently. Pretend everything in your field of vision is a Polaroid picture. Try and imagine it ripping off section by section, over and over again. This is what it was like. Underneath this all was the most complete and utter blackness that I have ever seen. I don't even feel as though I was seeing it, as much as simply being it. I was nothing for a moment, and then I fell. This here now is the most abstract, insane thing that I have ever experienced in my entire life. Once my reality tore open, the cocoon membrane thing suddenly ripped apart, and I felt like I was falling and twisting, turning violently into, well, something. Who the hell knows? I just distinctly remember falling violently, as if down a cliff, hitting every single boulder on the way down. As I hit the bottom, I honestly thought I had broken every bone in my body. I don't want to give the impression that I felt pain, because at that point, I really don't think I could have felt much of anything. It was more so that once I hit the bottom, my body was dead, and for the first time in my existence, there was nothing. There was simply this strange, abstract consciousness that wasn't necessarily me anymore. As I, or my new manifestation, whatever it was, I sat there, remembered seeing a blinding orb of light directly above me. It was fractalizing and turning and twisting. I thought it was my world, and that I had left it, and was never to be allowed back. There was no sadness, no pain, nothing, just nothing. Never in my life have I ever felt so existential. And it was then, from all sides of the orb, that these cosmic beings, about 5 of them, all looked down at me in disbelief. At first, I thought they were aliens, and I had been taken to them. Then, I recognized the face of Igby, and all the others. It was as if I had just returned from the land of Oz. Although, that being said, Oz would have certainly been more appealing than wherever it was I had been. As I sat up, I was completely shaken, but very glad to be back. Apparently only 10 minutes had passed in real time, and according to Igby, I was laying down for the whole thing, mumbling gibberish to myself and not blinking at all. I'm not sure about the whole not blinking thing, but then again, who knows? I certainly don't. I'm not trying to make this experience out to be anything more than it is. It was mine, and that's why it's important to me. None of this is exaggerated. In fact, there's shitloads of other stuff I'm sure I neglected to mention. Anyways, for what it's worth, I've never done salvia again. Because, well, I'm profoundly frightened that I will never come back from it. Be careful with this plant, and if you choose to take the definitive bong rip as I did, well, just... I don't even know. But just please, be in a padded room or something. Peace. The Subtle Steamroller, a 5-MeO DMT trip report, posted by Connexion to earwid.org, June 16th, 2009. After smoking 5-MeO DMT a couple of times, I've been wanting to insufflate it, having heard and read so many fantastical things about it, ranging from torturously frightening experiences to heavenly bliss. Finding myself rather free of obligations and at home alone on a Friday afternoon, I decided to give it a shot. My use of psychedelics is primarily for therapeutic purposes, although, no doubt, they've provided for some good recreational times as well in the past. I've been feeling kind of down on myself lately, so today I decided to dig deep and see what might be bothering me. Unlike my older batch of 5-MeO DMT, which was a creamy colour, This sample was bright snow white, almost sugary. It was crisp, evenly sized, in tiny crystals. I cut up 5 milligrams on the dining room table, weighed with concentration and diligence on my milligram scale. I then snorted up my left nostril with trepidation at 2:10 p.m. The experience unfolds as follows. 2:13. First alerts, and rapidly moving to a +1. The nasal burn is rather nasty, but not quite as ferocious as 2CE. It smells like DMT, but a lot milder, which I'm thankful for. Strangely enough, the smell of DMT always reminds me of my grade 3 teacher, Mrs. Simpson, who suffered from an insane and disagreeable case of halitosis. She could make eyes water at 20 paces. Wow. After only 5 minutes, I'm already feeling sleepy and relaxed, dreamy and confused. My nose hurts, and my head feels full of... well, I'm not actually sure. I just know it's time to lay down. 2:20. I lay on the couch, one eye cocked strategically towards the painting on the wall, relishing in the fact that the pain in my nostrils is subsiding. I'm still feeling very lightheaded, dizzy and disoriented. This come-up has been a little rough and rocky, but I've felt worse on various other substances. I'm quite twitchy, and points on my face are spasming sporadically. My lips, cheeks, eyelid. It's a little distracting to say the least. I notice that despite my amped up condition, my heart is beating normally, thank God. I drag myself up to write some notes, fighting the urge to do nothing. Typing is easy, almost easier than usual, which really is strange because I feel totally disconnected and disoriented. But my fingers, they seem to be working quite well. The rest of my body feels like it's immersed in agave syrup. Weird. I feel a sting on the top of my head where I had an acupuncture needle inserted a few hours ago. There's not much happening visually, but things do look different. Similar to the way things look when I stand up too fast and feel faint. But right now, I don't feel faint at all. There isn't much in the way of closed-eye visuals either. I'm listening to Boards of Canada, which I must recommend for psychedelic travelling, by the way. Music doesn't sound better or worse, just the same. I feel a little sick and shaky, but not too bad. I'm still very sleepy and dreamy though, so I go to lie down on the couch again. At 2:30, things have definitely peaked, and I'm slowly returning to the mundane condition of everyday reality. I still feel dreamy and drugged, but nothing noteworthy is happening. And this is something of a disappointment, because I'm in the mood to be moved. I consider that going deeper wouldn't be such a bad thing, and I ponder doing more. I'm reluctant to endure that terrible nasal burn again. Oh well, fuck it. I'll do a bit more. 2:40. I found it surprisingly easy to operate my scale and carefully measure out my next dose. I snort another 5 milligrams. Yes, still a crappy burn. Ugh. Within 3 minutes, I'm coming back up. Harder. Yeah, much harder this time. I stagger to the couch and flop myself down. A warm, tingling flush setting across my skin from head to toe. Time passes. It's 2:57 now, and I'm coming back to Earth. Whoa, that was pretty intense. I'm able to type at this point, but would have been quite challenging 5 minutes ago. I convey the experience as follows. I found myself swirling through a dreamy, squishy, reality-bending place. The Boards of Canada were providing the perfect backdrop to the experience, and the music has begun to merge with all of my senses. This is unlike any other psychedelic. It's very physical. I feel like I'm in a meat grinder of sorts, my body twisting and churning through space. Although that metaphor sounds scary and uncomfortable, it is neither. I'm mostly indifferent to the physical sensations at this minute. There's a great deal of movement in my visual field, but there's little or no colour, a monochrome, morphing multiscape. Twisting and turning geometric shapes dominate my vision. But that raises the point that these aren't really visuals, so much as visions. I'm not seeing with my eyes necessarily, but rather I'm seeing with my mind's eye. My autonomic nervous system is depressed, and I must repeatedly remind myself to breathe. Most interesting is that through all of this, there is a sober part of me, an observer, sitting nearby and able to think with perfect clarity. It's as if I'm split in two, one part of me swirling through a haze of obscurity, while the other half of me sits by like a semi-concerned psychoanalyst, one leg crossed over the other, scribbling notes in a small white notebook. This sober self encourages me to stay calm through what at times are challenging moments, what at times are slightly frightening. Although immersed at this point, I am still unsatisfied. There are many strange feelings, but nothing of any meaning. Nothing that amounts to anything more interesting than a detached, disembodied delirium. 3:06. I return sluggishly to the computer to type, which, again, I find surprisingly easy to do. My whole head is swimming, but 3 of my 8 fingers accurately dance across the keyboard, punching out words with lightning speed. I have minor open-eye visuals, not unlike the onset of DMT, where colours are brighter and everything is clearly outlined and plastic-looking. Everything is pixelated, and I feel anaesthetised to a degree, but there is quite a lot of tension and pain throughout my body, which I guess is not unusual for me, so I stand up and stretch my aching muscles. I hang limply, bent at the waist, and release much of the tension, feeling a much-needed pull through my legs, lower back, and between my shoulder blades. It is at this very moment that some of the very therapeutic effects start to take place. Indeed, I suffer from chronic pain, and I begin to see that it is at least partially a manifestation of my inner psychological unrest. This idea comes to me with great clarity, and I realise I am not taking an active enough role in dealing with this pain. I should be exercising more, and perhaps meditating to achieve deeper states of relaxation. I then think of an employee of mine who works very hard, and I realise I probably don't give him the positive feedback that he deserves. I take him for granted. After this thought, I scurry to the kitchen to write myself a reminder to rectify this when he returns from his vacation. I also realise that my work wardrobe is getting shabby. In an effort to minimise my impact on the earth, I try to get the most mileage as possible out of my clothes, but I probably need to bite the bullet and get some new ones at some point. For all the work I do to minimise my impact on the earth, perhaps I can afford myself this small token of self-appreciation. Yes, what mind medicine this is. There's more to this, but I'll save you from the personal details. I decide to myself in this moment that I really should do this more often, but now I'm suddenly struck with the munchies. 3:48. I've been on a linear, easygoing come-down for the past 45 minutes, and I spent this time satisfying my munchies with an evil bowl of Doritos and pondering my life condition. I feel no ill effects as the drug departs my body, as I would for sure if I were coming down from, say, 2CE. By now, I'm almost down to baseline, and I return to my office work with renewed vigour. I take a break to stroll off down the road to pick up my mail, and talk about a movie with a very good friend on the telephone, The sun is bright and warm on this fine spring day in Spongleville. At 4:30 I'm completely straightened out, and no come down to speak of. No tension, no pain, no jitters, no lack of appetite either, and no cracked out feeling that I usually get from psychedelics. I simply feel wonderful and giddy. I begin to prepare a homemade pizza for my love, who is returning home from work shortly. I smile reassuredly to myself as I work. I'm happy and excited to share my experience with her. In conclusion, this definitely lived up to all of my expectations, although it left many questions unanswered. 5-MeO-DMT provides great therapeutic benefit, and I look very forward to doing it again soon. This was not a recreational experience for me at all. I couldn't label it as fun, but it was rewarding and enlightening. I don't suspect the DEA is particularly concerned with this one. The strange, intense, and sometimes uncomfortable effects of this material will make its use self-limiting for sure. File this one under medicine. No doubt, 5 milligrams was not enough. 10 milligrams, though, was adequate. I could have gone deeper, and next time will increase my dose to 7 + 7. Splitting the dose was a good idea as well. I think it smoothed out the come-up somewhat, and allowed me to transition into the deeper experience with greater ease. I have no doubt that in larger doses, this medicine could serve me with the terror I've read so much about, and at times have felt in the past myself. The ominous power of 5-MeO-DMT is well understood by this meek and humble traveller. I will proceed with great caution and respect in the future. To be honest, I can only thank a higher intelligence, perhaps God, for providing these gateways to higher consciousness. Living Through Every War, an LSD and ketamine trip report taken from the Vivec Discord. Hello lads and lasses. I'll split this experience by the hours, as it is insanely in depth and needs to be explained step by step. 11 AM before the 700 microgram dose. I went round to a really good friend of mine's, his name is Ryan. Chatting as we usually do about games, the usual stuff, whilst we waited for another one of my friends who was called Piers. We discussed how the 12 hours was going to go, like taking the LSD, then going for a walk during the peak, and then spending the rest of the time at home. Finally, Piers turns up around 11:30 AM. We're all chatting as we do, and start to take our first doses. Me and Ryan take 4 tabs of LSD, totaling 700 micrograms, whilst Piers, who hadn't taken LSD in 5 years, wanted to take it slow, so he only took the 1 tab being 200 micrograms. 12 PM, first hour. So we waited for it to kick in, and admittedly, I was rather nervous, purely because I'd never taken this much LSD before. This was quite uncharted waters for me, and I was not entering with any questions, nor wanting any answers. I felt quite anxious, and it felt as if I had a weight on my chest. Not anything I had felt before taking LSD in the past. 1 PM, second hour. By this point, the LSD had kicked in. No insane visuals just yet, but my headspace felt a lot more open, and it started to really kick in. We all started listening to music to ease us into it. Piers slapped on some chill music of a man on some car motion, playing some kick-ass instruments. This really lightened the mood and helped with the anxiety a lot. Meanwhile, Ryan was prepping for us to go out to a nearby nature reserve by where we lived. It's a beautiful place and is our usual spot for a walk. We stumbled across a den last time when we took LSD, but more on that later. We then left Ryan's place to go for our walk, and everything was starting to feel euphoric, and I really appreciated the day. It was blistering hot out, 33 degrees Celsius, so we took plenty of water with us to make sure we wouldn't succumb to heat stroke. 2 PM and 3 PM, the third and fourth hour. By this point we had made it to the den, but the LSD really made it look like some satanic pit. And for my friend Ryan, there were just too many spiderwebs and bugs there. We all decided to just stand outside of the den and spark up a joint. Although I didn't smoke any, purely because I just don't smoke weed, but the other two did. After they had the joint, we started to head back to Ryan's house, and by this point, the peak had hit. The endless trees soon turned into a desert environment to me. It was so bloody hot that it honestly felt like I was walking through the Saharan desert. I had visions of looking in the distance and seeing a mirage along with an Egyptian vibe. It would have been beautiful if it didn't feel like my skin was burning from the sun. It felt like we were 3 wise men travelling afar. The walk felt like years, but as soon as we got home, that's where the real fun began. 4 PM, 5th hour. We sat down and popped some music on, this time not so chill. More drum and bass, techno, or anything with synthesizers in to really get us into the zone. Piers had an idea of whacking this song on which was absolutely insane. He told us to sit on Ryan's yoga mat and meditate whilst we listened to the song. We weren't allowed to see the video until we had listened to the said song. Myself and Ryan got comfortable and closed our eyes as this song started to blare. I had visions of going through astral planes, different planets surrounding my mind. I was leaving the Milky Way and then returning to it, seeing the whole of Earth with my own eyes. The Earth was surrounded by UFOs abducting what I can only describe as souls. Once the song had finished, me and Ryan described the exact same vision, as if our minds connected telepathically. Piers then shows us a video of the song, and Lord behold, it is just 2 men jamming to an array of insane instruments, multitasking and really going hard on this piece of impromptu music. It was amazing. By this point the lads wanted another joint, and I opted to stay inside and listen to a few nostalgic DMB from the PS2 era of gaming. This is where it started to get dark for me. Me being on my own, I felt lonely, and my own thoughts started to really glide away. I was looking at the tattoos on my arm contort and start to mimic the shapes of satanic symbols like pentagrams. I hear a voice demand I shake the hand. My mind told me it was a deal to sell my soul for unimaginable wealth in the future. I gladly accepted and shook the hand. I then closed my eyes, and my body felt overrun with anxiety, lust, and ecstasy. I could see what I would describe as a black-haired, red-skinned woman, naked and covered in piercings. I was weirdly seduced by her. She even let me touch her. Long story short on that one is that I fingered a devil. Pretty fucking cool in some sense, but also very odd. This lasted a good 20 minutes. When the lads returned, we then switched back on some more intense drum and bass, and this is where my visuals started to get really intense. 5 PM, 6th hour. The music playing was so intense that I just closed my eyes, and this is when my anxiety got so insane that it physically hurts my chest. It was 2,000 years of warfare in my head. My perception of time was completely gone. A constant battle. I started off prehistoric, fighting an animal with a stone spear which gradually started to progress through time. I then became a knight, slaying a worm by piercing it through the skull with a claymore. I then was on a sail ship fighting a Spanish man of war, in which this time my ship sunk. I couldn't breathe as I plunged into the water. As soon as I resurfaced, I catapulted into the air, and landed back on the ground in some trench warfare. Going over the top, a shell hit in front of me, and it faded to white. I could hear planes, and this is where it started to get interesting. This is the most vivid hallucination of the lot. I was an RAF pilot in World War II, piloting a Spitfire. It was the Battle of Britain. I could see the white cliffs of Dover as I was attacking enemy fighters. I was shooting down so many of them, when all of a sudden I was shot on the left wing. I came crashing down, and that's when the music changed along with my death. A futuristic war now began. I was piloting a kick-ass mech, and every time the bass dropped on this song it felt like I was shooting lasers, stomping and attacking everything in my way. It was cool. And then the music stopped. My mind was at ease. I felt like I'd fought thousands of wars and survived the battle within my mind. I believe I crushed the anxiety I was feeling because, after this, I had the best trip possible. 6 PM to 7 PM, 7th and 8th hour. All good vibes from here on out. I'm a massive sucker for nostalgia, and the Wipeout soundtrack came on. The visions of this is amazing. I was piloting a space racer for the longest time, and it was honestly so cool. We all had the funniest conclusion and ultimatum about this trip. We all had the shocking revelation that one of our good friends is in fact gay. He hasn't even come out, but we do thoroughly believe now that he is, which makes so much sense in hindsight. But I won't go too far into it, as it's more of you've got to know the guy to understand it. We all sat outside and had a cup of tea in Ryan's garden, and we spoke about our friend group and how times have changed, etc. We all had a really good mindset, and appreciated each other because of this amazing trip. It was at 8 PM that we all decided that it would be ket o'clock. 8 PM to 1 AM, the last few hours. It was at this point we had gotten the ketamine out, and I only took around 4 lines, which equaled a gram. The other 2 were animals and took around 10 lines each. The visuals on this really blew the LSD out of the water. I was seeing so many different things, and there was this white light in my head which stayed in the corners of my eyesight. I really wanted to try and catch it, but never could. The nebula which clouded my mind was so intense and so beautiful that I wouldn't have minded if I actually stayed in that state forever. Real life seemed boring compared to the state I was experiencing. The music was loud, but my mind was louder. We all sat down on the floor and began to watch a multitude of trippy, insane videos, and I was glued to the floor watching the TV as all these visualizers and videos played. The moment I moved, my hands turned into talons. I was an eagle. I then placed my head on the floor and boxed my body up. I was then a beetle. I then rose up again and sat in the position I was originally in. I was in a Japanese dojo this time, meditating and relaxing whilst listening to the most beautiful of sounds. As the LSD weared off, the ketamine only screamed louder, with my visuals turning the tissue I held in my hands into a lotus flower, dancing around my hands as I was fixated on the sounds of the beautiful song. My life felt so serene and complete in this moment. I had survived a battle within my mind that I never thought I would overcome. The afterglow was beautiful, and the anxious weight on my chest was non-existent now. I was happy and content with what I had experienced. Don't get me wrong, I was so close to breaking, but my mind felt so alive. I found myself worrying about things a lot less than I used to. It's the day after, and I woke up rather glum, to be honest. I'm trying to process what the fuck had happened the night before. I couldn't comprehend anything. I needed to really grasp everything. I just went about my day as I usually would, the best I can. Present day. After coming to grips and writing this report, I cannot explain how beautiful life is, and how lucky I am to be able to witness such beautiful imagery through LSD and K. It's an art, really isn't just a trip, and without it, I would still be scared about the most stupidest of shit. I'd still worry about everyday life, talking to people, and overall just worrying about where I want to be, when I'm actually in the best spot I have ever been. And if I'd not confronted my mind, I don't think it would have ever stopped. Thank you for reading my trip report. I might have missed so much more, but this is the most brief yet in-depth summary I can do. as it was such a long, long trip. An experience that is in a league of its own compared to other psychedelics. An ayahuasca trip report, posted by the user I'm With Crazy to the ayahuasca subreddit 7 years ago. Age, 34. Gender, male. Weight, 72 kilograms. Dose, 60 milliliters. Physical health, no known issues. Mental health, no known issues either. From my perspective, ayahuasca is categorized in a league of its own compared to other psychedelics and plant medicines. It takes you deep within your subconscious, showing you the most sacred parts of your soul. You walk away from the experience with tremendous insight after a night under its influence. And in total, I've had over 40 ceremonies with the Madre, this report being one of them. This night turned out to be the most intense, mind-blowing experience I have ever been through in my whole life. Don't use that description loosely either. It was transcendent on so many levels, but do not confuse transcendence with grace. Sometimes, our most difficult experiences are also our most rewarding. I think there were 6 people total in the ceremony this evening, which took place at a small flat in the suburbs of London. All but one were newcomers to this whole new world of Aya. As we all found our places, we glanced at each other nervously, wondering just what the hell we got ourselves into. The shaman gave us a quick overview of what to expect. Ask for anything you want to see, they said. They also explained the process of purging and how it represents the physical and spiritual removal of negative matter from your body. This reminded us that purging is seen as a victory in an Aya ceremony, something that was a little hard to understand at first, until I ended up experiencing my first purge later this evening. Do not be afraid if you have to use the toilet, they added. Many people experience diarrhea during the ceremony. Luckily for us, nobody had to run to the John all night, which, I must say, was slightly relieving. Eventually, we exhausted the shaman with our overly concerning questions, and they announced the ceremony would now begin. A tea candle was lit, and the lights turned off. The room was so dark that even the air felt heavy. With calculated reverence, the shaman began to sing to the bitter brown brew, to bless it before being consumed. Once they were finished, they poured neatly measured portions of the brew into tiny glass cups for each of the participants. The cups were distributed to each person ceremoniously. As I took my cup, I sat back and brought it to my lips. Even from here, I could smell the magic behind the liquid concoction. I was told that it's important to set an intention before you drink, and being mindful of my manners, I decided it might be a good idea to actually do that. No sense in diving headfirst into the underworld without a little good luck for good measure. I simply want to understand, I told myself, and my little cup of suede liquid. I didn't know what I was hoping to achieve by simply asking for understanding, because now that I think about it, that statement leaves a lot of room for slightly terrifying things to occur. You want an understanding of evil spirits? Well, you asked for it. To be honest, I felt like I was ready to receive a deeper understanding of my life and the direction it was heading. Figuring this intention was actually worthy of the ceremony, I sat up and took a deep breath. I then closed my eyes and gulped down the liquid. As it made its way to my stomach, my entire body began to shiver. I could feel the frequency of my body begin to vibrate slightly higher. I wasn't sure if this was me shivering from the foul taste, or if the brew actually made a shock to my system. Either way, I decided there was nothing I could change now, so I lit myself a mapacho, an indigenous cigarette with pure tobacco, and I sat back as I let the medicine take effect. As my eyes closed, the drumming began. Over the next few minutes, the rhythm sped up a bit as the aya started to take effect. I began to feel the beat of the drum was in harmony with the heartbeat of the universe. The synchronicity grew as the medicine pulsed through my veins, and soon, I felt my entire body spiritually harmonize with everyone else in the room. Connectedness, oneness. These are common themes when one is under the influence of aya. Little by little, another dimension began to gently pierce my veil of consciousness. Out of the corner of my eye, I began to see slight visions of fractals, or what I was later told was sacred geometry, in all these bright neon colours, all moving in a very organised manner. I felt like I was looking into a cosmic kaleidoscope. The shapes began to shift, taking on different forms. I was beginning to feel like I was diving into the hidden depths of an unknown sea, discovering things I never knew existed. The creatures I saw along the way would morph right before my eyes. It felt weird. It was like I wasn't supposed to look at them in their true form or something. I figured it's never a good idea to piss off a spirit of any kind, so I made sure not to stare at them for too long. Besides, staring is rude anyway. As this cacophony of lights and strange forms began to settle into the world around me, I could feel some familiar memories from my past rising to the surface of my consciousness. It was like watching a tiny air bubble escape from the bottom of the ocean floor. It's hard to imagine that something so small becomes so large by the time it reaches the surface. And as I discovered tonight, emotions also behave in a similar way. Just in case you're wondering, it's impossible to try and trap the bubble when it's on its way to the surface, literally and metaphorically. So here's a bit of advice. Just let whatever comes up make its way to the top. Any efforts contrary to that effect are futile, and just make things more difficult to say the least. You'll understand what I'm talking about after your first or second ceremony with Aya. The emotions that were rising finally took on the form I was able to see. I was being shown the very specific examples of how I'd hurt other people in the past. I saw how I'd made them cry for one reason or another, on purpose or by mistake. But each of these events all played out in front of me with absolute clarity. From my present state of here and now, I was transported back in time. I literally was watching my life on TV in reverse. The same way it appears when you rewind a video cassette tape. Everything was quickly moving in reverse, with lines of static reverberating up and down along the screen. And then suddenly, everything stopped, and a cosmic finger reached out from the darkness and hit play on the video of my life. I saw faces floating all around me, turning in slow circles around me while rotating clockwise. I noticed that these were all familiar faces. There were no strangers around me whatsoever. A message was received that said that these are all the people you've hurt in your life at some point or another. Whether you meant to or not, they have felt pain from you in this life. I was perplexed, shocked, devastated. I saw the faces of those that I knew had been hurt by me, and then others that I did not know I'd hurt. But then I would quickly understand how I had inadvertently hurt them in the first place. I saw the many breakups I'd been through, ones that I initiated. I saw the numerous people I've had to fire over the years in my business. Fights with close friends from high school, fights with my parents, fights with my adult friends. I saw the devastating breakup in high school I went through that felt like a bomb had been dropped. I saw myself sitting in my room on my phone, listening as my girlfriend began to tell me she had found someone else and that it was over. I remember saying nothing. I simply hung up the phone and fell to the floor in agony as I started to sob for what felt like an eternity. I was reliving every emotion imaginable. The faces reconvened together again all around me and tears began streaming down the faces, leaving little droplets on the ground below. Each face was rotating at different speeds, and as every visage made its way back to the centre, it would stop for a brief moment and stare at me, asking me why. Why did you do this to me? All of a sudden, the faces quickly veered away to the peripheral of my vision, as if some kind of magnet was pushing objects away in reverse polarity. In the distance, there was a fanciful Chinese dragon that began making its way towards me, dancing through the darkness like a dolphin playfully swimming along the surface. As it approached me, its head turned towards my face and cocked slightly to the left. Tears began to pour from its eyes. The volume of tears increased and began to feel like a waterfall was coming from both of its eyes. It was by this time that I had also begun to sob profusely, feeling the pains of the emotions that I was reliving, yet still trying to understand the meaning of what I was being shown. "You don't have to be so hard on others," said a voice. "People do things their own way. They do them different than you do. But the end result is always the same. You do not need to show emotional force to get people to do things that way that you want them done." I just felt like a load of bricks was dropped on me. It felt strangely liberating though. It was as if a foundation built from the past had been destroyed. One that desperately needed to go. And now, the ayahuasca had rebuilt my foundation, brick by brick, in a way that would be better engineered for what my future holds in store for me. I died and discovered the true meaning of life. A 60x Salvia trip report posted by SBSB Kinney 2 to the Salvia subreddit 4 years ago. I broke through on Salvia for the first time in 2.5 years. I'll do my best to explain what happened because it was earth-shattering in a good way, and I want to hear if anyone here has had similar experiences to mine. I'm also going to break up the bodies of text a lot to make it easier to read. The TLDR version is that I was in a trippy dimensional knot before peeling myself out of existence. But I didn't die. I found out that I am merely a bump on the massive blob of consciousness that is humanity, and I can go live another lifetime anytime I want. I vibed in the circle for a bit, forgot who I was, then slowly came back to it. Anyways, I've smoked salvia at least 12 times, but only broken through once before. That time was definitely worth it for the bucket list, but it did freak me out a bit and left me with more questions about the meaning of life than before. Ever since that time, I would only take small hits for mild effects, but for the most part, I wouldn't touch the stuff for months on end. Recently, I've been entertaining the idea of mirrors and their place in the supernatural world due to the malevolent feeling I get when I stare at myself in it for too long. It's like I'm not looking at my reflection, but the reflection is looking at me. The other day, I took some salvia and stared at myself in the mirror for 30 minutes straight. I definitely noticed the effects of the salvia, but was aware of my surroundings the entire time. I must have been craving more on a subconscious level though, because the next night I loaded an even bigger bowl. I sat down on a red leather couch in my room with the lights set to royal blue. I also set my TV to a YouTube video of trippy fractal animations so that the mild effects would be amplified. I took a decent hit of the small 60x salvia bowl that I'd packed and started to hold the smoke in. I remember leaning down to the right. I hadn't even had time to set the bong down before things started changing. Despite being in a blue room, the colours shifted to a much more golden, yellow, wheat field sort of tone. But that's the easiest of changes I can actually describe. The next part is confusing, because it happened in what I could only imagine to be a fourth dimensional plane. But I'll describe it in an analogy. Imagine you're tie-dyeing a shirt. The first step is to pinch and twist in the middle until it's a bundle ready to dye. Now, imagine that, but upscaled so that you become some unknown entity, and the twisted tie-dye shirt becomes the universe as I was now experiencing it. If you've heard of a similar analogy for a wormhole with a piece of paper, this may help explain what I was experiencing. The centre of this dimensional knot started off small and at my core, right hip. Initially inconsequential, but once I noticed its significance, its magnitude grew. I could tell something was wrong, but couldn't tell what was wrong about it. It felt as if my head was bent over and going through my thigh, as if time and space had literally folded in half. By this point, I had of course forgotten that I'd even taken salvia. I felt trapped and scared, and wanted to return to normalcy, whatever that was. Frantically looking for a solution, I realised that I could grab the centre, or tab for lack of better words, that controlled this dimensional phenomenon. I quickly reached down towards my right hip. I grabbed the tab and pull it in a leftward motion over my shoulder. And to my horror, I realised that this only made things worse by actually increasing the rate at which my universe was collapsing with me at the gravitational centre. I remember some force of my own mind saying, "Isn't it funny how all of your old problems pale in comparison to being stuck in this dimensional knot?" I agreed with my mind and pondered on how insignificant all of my problems in the past had been. I couldn't even remember them now. Anytime I resisted, reality only twisted more. My actions were irreversible. I could sense that the twisting was reaching its culmination and feared what was next to come. Some quick context. At this point in the trip, I was still holding the bong, and I know in retrospect that I dropped it on my duvet cover, soaking my blanket in dirty bong water. I probably saw this and thought, "Shit," to myself in real life. But this translated differently in terms of what I was perceiving on salvia. So, back to the trip. As the twisting progressed, my mind began to detach from all physical things, including my own body. I felt as if I were a wet towel, soaked in memories, thoughts, and all of my worldly possessions, being wrung out by an unstoppable force. The last physical possession I saw leave me was the bong. And as I dropped it, I started hearing obscene language and slurs from a chorus of voices, as if they were the final remnants of my words being squeezed out of me. The curse words continued in a shrill tone as the visuals I was experiencing increased to a level of complexity that I genuinely couldn't possibly describe to you. With each dimensional fold, my confusion increased, and I gradually moved towards the realization that I was probably dying. After all, my universe was literally collapsing. However, I also began to sense a benevolent presence that was contributing to the chorus of curses. It felt as though someone were talking to me, cradling me throughout the whole process, as if it were divine. It felt as if each revelation of my death was made because of the things I was being shown. I then hear my inner voice speak in unison with my higher consciousness guide. I'll do my best to paraphrase. Imagine this, but with the trippy fractal animations. Shit, fuck, shit. Oh shit, fuck. I start calming down. Okay. Am I dying? The benevolent presence affirms my suspicion. Well, I guess there's nothing I can do to stop it. At least I'll finally know what happens. This feels familiar though. In a way, it feels right. It's like I'm recalling forgotten information about the mysteries of the universe. At this point, I gasp in revelation. Oh my god. This is how I wanted myself to find out. I chose this so very long ago. I started to realize that the divine presence who was guiding and comforting me this whole time was myself. But not in the traditional sense. I was far more evolved and ever powerful. More importantly, I was a loving presence that happily awaited mortal me's return from the third dimension. I then said in awe, perfectly crafted to reveal everything to me. Does this mean I'll finally find out what happens next? Oh my god, I remember. I felt overjoyed as I began to realize that I was returning home. After this revelation, the dimensional collapse progressed exponentially until I finally left this realm and returned to what I now recognize to be my true origin, the soul consciousness from which we all originate. I'll try my best to describe how this origin functions as I understood it. First, some context. 5 years ago, I asked a girl named Bella if she believed in God. She told me that she believed we all derive from the same universal being. She believed that when you die, your soul rejoins the mass to merge with everybody else's. I found it crazy at the time, but in hindsight, I realized that I saw the exact thing that she described. In this new yet entirely familiar plane, I saw my entire life and identity as a raised bump inside a massive cylinder or ring, with what looked like pale blue lava flowing harmoniously amongst itself. However, it was not actually lava, but the physical form of all the energy, light, and consciousness in the universe existing as one. There are other bumps on the cylinder as well, each representing a different identity or soul, currently experiencing a lifetime. Once their lifetime ends, the bump subsides and the identity rejoins the soul consciousness once more. I existed briefly as a bump on the cylinder, long enough to finally understand. Then, I felt a sense of euphoria rush over me as I, the bump, lost all form and merged back into the ring, just as all bumps have been doing for infinity. I was actually happy to be dead. Being a part of and circulating with this energy and presence felt amazing and all-loving. As I thought about how human experiences are only accessible through the ring, I realized I could live a life again if I wanted, but it was all up to me. To clarify just how up to me it was, the small amount of identity that I had left could decide to disperse and fully integrate back into the ring, or stay as a unit moving among other identities who chose the same path. Additionally, I could choose to go back to Earth reincarnated if I so desired, to inhabit a new vessel to experience life. I could even live the exact same life all over again. This entity I'd become truly defied all laws of time and space as humans understand it. I remember feeling a strong sense of relief and even laughter when I thought about all the moments wasted worrying about my mortality. when I should have known that nothing ever ceases to exist. It simply changes forms. Just as energy cannot be created or destroyed, neither can consciousness. I felt at one with the universe. I don't remember coming out of the trip too well, but I remember being back in my room and seeing the trippy fractal animations I'd put on my TV beforehand. They looked way more trippy than usual, and the patterns extended past the screen. I wrote a summary of what happened on a piece of paper while still partially tripping. The handwriting was frantic, large and messy. It reads as follows. Things were peeling in a dimensional way. I heard slurs culminating to my life force, ending in realizing that was how I was going to tell myself. This all culminated till I died. It was quite comforting. I had forgotten that I was Seeley. I can't remember what I wanted. I remember when I was writing this being frustrated about that last sentence. That wasn't me explaining how I felt during the trip, but rather the frustration I felt over forgetting something crucial. My best bet is that it was some concept that actually explains the science behind everything I'm claiming. I'll always wonder though. I talked to a friend about everything this morning, and he suggested that considering I don't remember the end of my trip, my soul could have chosen to live as Seeley for just a bit longer, suggesting this could have been real. I'm not saying that this is the truth behind the afterlife, but considering I was an atheist before, this certainly is a more comforting story to tell myself. Plus, unlike those who follow more established religions, I actually saw this with my own eyes, and all it took was smoking a plant produced naturally by our planet.